Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. Today is day 2 of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission meeting. It is Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. First order I'll do is take a roll call. Commissioner Doobie. Here. Commissioner Byrd.
Here.
Commissioner Brokaw.
Here.
Commissioner Ladwig.
Here.
Commissioner Jolovich.
Here.
Commissioner Ledval.
Here.
And myself, I'm Ken Roberts. We have a quorum. We're okay to proceed. If we could get for first order to everybody to pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. An order of housekeeping. To those watching via Zoom, if you did not send in an advance comment sheet prior to the start of the meeting, but would still like to comment on agenda item, please do one of the following. If you are on Zoom via your computer, you can send a chat to the host with your name and the agenda item you wish to comment on. If you are listening on phone, you can send an email to wgfbideo@yo.gov, making sure to include your name, phone number you're calling from, and the agenda item you wish to comment on. Also, after each agenda item, we will first hear from those who submitted their advance comment sheet, and then if you do not send in an advance comment sheet prior to the start of the meeting, but would still like to comment on the agenda item, you may do one of the follows. If you're on Zoom via your computer, you can send a chat to the host with your name and agenda item you wish to comment on. If you are listening on the phone, you can send an email to the wgfbideo@yo.gov, making sure to include your name, phone number you're calling from, and the agenda item you wish to comment on. When your name is called, you will be prompted by the host to the role of panelist. Once you have entered the meeting as a panelist, you will be able to unmute your microphone and turn on your video if you wish to speak to the commission. That's how we'll proceed. I think first item, what we're going to do is this will be on number 9, on the second part of 9, and it'll be the department's recognition of hunter education accomplishments.
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, Commission, thank you for having me today to recognize our Hunter Ed volunteer instructors today for 2001. I'm going to go through a couple of different awards, and some of the instructors are here today. So we'll be recognizing the 1000 Volunteer Point Recognition Award. And this award is given to Hunter Ed instructors who have earned 1000 points in 2021. And that is a combination of the amount of years they've been teaching, the hours they have volunteered, and the amount of students they have taught. With the help of Commissioner Doobie donating a commissioner's license for a raffle and the Muley Fanatic Foundation, these instructors are also given a firearm of their choice. And all instructors have selected their firearms and most have received them. So the volunteers we'll be recognizing today include Chad Askamit, JD Gray, and Bruce Salzman, Daniel Conkling. And so if any of those instructors are here, I'd like you to come up and be recognized for that 1000-point award. Okay, we're also recognizing Game Warden Adam Hymas, who has earned a 1000-point award as well, but because employees can't receive monetary awards, he doesn't receive a firearm. The last award I'd like to recognize today is the International Hunters Education Association Instructor of the Year for Wyoming. This is a new award from the International Hunter Education Association in honor of the 50th anniversary of their organization. And the winner of this year's award is Pat Malson. I know the director would like to say a few words as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to reflect on the fact that our hunter education program in Wyoming and our ability to reach the number of folks that we do is largely on the backs of volunteers. These folks all over the state, volunteer hunter education instructors, carry the brunt of the load for this program. And, I think that the fact that they're volunteers and the fact that they a lot of them invest a lifetime into hunter education really makes our program strong. We've talked, and I know it's the interest of the commission as well as the public to increase our capacity to provide even more hunter education around the state. And just like it's been for the last however many years, 50 years, it's going to be incumbent upon us to be able to leverage our volunteers to be able to make that happen, as well as our internal department resources. So thanks to all the hunter education instructors across the state, and congratulations to those who you recognized here today, Sarah. Thank you.
And if you'd all join me and give them a round of applause for all those people who can't be. Sarah. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item number 11, Chief King. And this will be on the NX Bar Ranch expansion request.
Morning, President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, and members of the commission. I will introduce Mr. Hal Corbett and Brian McCarty. Hal represents the NX Bar Ranch, and Mr. McCarty is their ranch manager. They will provide some information and stand for questions regarding their request to expand the NX Bar game farm.
Commissioners, Director Nesbitt, thank you for allowing us to talk. I'm Hal Corbett, as Rick advised. I'm the attorney representing the NX Bar Ranch, and I have the NX Bar Ranch manager with us, Brian McCarty. His grandfather was the individual who started the game farm back in around 1970. But first, I'd like to thank you for letting us appear. And secondly, for holding your meeting in Buffalo, because it's a whole lot more convenient to us than Evanston when we last visited with you. You'll recall the request here is that the only game farm in the state of Wyoming that the permit be expanded to include an additional 3,000 acres on the east side of the current permit area. These 3,000 acres were originally part of the NX Bar Ranch back when it was in 1975, when it was recognized as the only game farm in the state. Excuse me, the 3,000 acres were acquired about 3 years ago by the NX Bar. But they were part of those acres were part of the ranch originally when the ranch was first permitted. Commissioner Roberts raised a question about another 10,000 acres that were part of the ranch back in the 1970s. Brian can speak to those. Those 10,000 acres are not owned by the ranch today. They're owned by 5 or 6 individuals and ranches. They will probably not come for sale. And as a practical matter, because those 10,000 acres are on the other side of the Badger Creek County Road, it would be very difficult it would not be practical to have those 10,000 acres part of the ranch. But again, to repeat, when the ranch was grandfathered in 1975, it consisted of 35,000 acres, including the 22,000 currently under elk fence, and including the 3,000 acres that we're asking the commission to expand the permit to. And I guess I would argue from a legal standpoint, this commission certainly has the authority to expand the permit by regulation, the permit area. Because when originally grandfathered, again, the ranch consisted of 35,000 acres, not the 22,000 currently under the fence. So we have any questions? I'll defer to Brian, who's been managing the ranch for 38 years. And I'll let him answer them.
I have one question. On the 3,000 acres, what's the intent of that? Is it a fence? My question would be two, what would you fence it in, or is it already fenced in? Or at this current time, is there access to public hunters in that 3,000 acres?
In regards to what we would do with it, it'd make it contiguous with the other 22,000 acres, fence the perimeter, remove the fence in between the two properties and make it all one.
So what is it? What's currently on the 3,000? Is it fenced off, the 3,000?
It's cattle fence, it's deer and antelope. There's some elk in that vicinity.
Is it accessible to the public now?
No.
Any other questions? Commissioner Doobie?
Mr. President, Brian, could you go over the operation a little bit as far as is the elk operation itself and refresh everyone's memory regarding how you operate? I know you don't have, it's pretty much a closed system with AI and that type of stuff. Could you please
Yeah.
go over that, please?
The Chase family has owned the ranch for 22 years now. They've since not done any commercial hunting. Right now, our elk numbers are 1,300 with progeny. And they are running their employees, friends, family. There's no commercial hunting at all, no income from that. They do some wounded warrior hunts. They do some donated hunts for needy organizations, children, and that sort of stuff. And then we do let some local people come out and harvest some elk if we haven't reached our quota for the year. We don't import any elk. We don't sell any elk. We do some artificial insemination in order to change our bloodline and, avoid any major inbreeding programs. So that's been very successful. Right now we breed like 20 cows a year and turn those out every year into the herd. They have quite a facility there, a big lodge that they put everybody up in. Obviously, the meat is we've actually decreased our number from 2,300 down to 1,300, and our goal is to get to 800 so that we don't have way too many elk in an enclosed area. So that's been going on now for the last 5-6 years to get our numbers down and make it manageable. So
How many elk do you harvest a year, do you think?
it's varied over the years. I mean, when they first bought it, 100. This year we'll harvest 300.
And that's only to family members?
Yes, and employees.
It's a big family.
Yeah. It's a big family. And I will mention that they make very good use of the meat. They a lot of their employees come up and hunt, and if somebody doesn't want their meat, we donate it to a charity, or it goes to employees back in New Mexico and Arizona and Texas. So
What about exotic species? Now, I know the question came up last time. You said there was just elk, there was no exotic species
Yeah,
whatsoever.
my granddad had some exotics there when I was a kid. There was some ibex and mouflon and whatnot, but we have not had exotics in the last 40 years. It's been a while. And while we're on the subject of exotics, they would be more than happy to exclude them from the chapter regulations. They have no desire to ever adventure into that territory.
What about the deer herd in there?
There's a mule deer herd in there. They've been in there the whole time. They hunt the mule deer. And of course, you gotta go by state laws, draw a license, whatnot, but there's always been deer in the 22,000 acres. And a few antelope.
Anybody, any questions?
Mr. President, I don't have a problem with the Game and Fish commission authorizing additional 3,000 acres since it was part of the original expansion. I think the annex bar has shown that they've been very responsible in how they've managed their property. After speaking with some of the Game and Fish personnel in that area, that they seem to think that they're doing a good job and have cooperated fully with the department. As far as additional acres in the future, I leave that up to future commissions to deal with and to worry about. But right now, this is the only thing in front of us. And I personally don't have a problem with having the department look into the possibility of accepting their proposal.
Yeah, it just concerns me of, selling it, taking it back and then incorporating. I mean, that's kind of my, and I don't know. I just wonder about it. So I don't know if the president's, setting it for the next commissions coming up, whether we're setting ourselves up or the future commissions to, when they deal with it, to they can come back in and say, hey, well, we have presence, you've done that before, so therefore why we can't come back in the 10,000 also. That's my concern. I think if we set that tone, then we're gonna the next commission which won't be us, might have, there might be some sort of a unfair kind of a, precedence that we have.
And that's all possible. I just feel like that if that time comes and they come in there, that commission can deal with it. Leave it up to them. I don't think it's proper for them to maybe make conditions as we discussed before, that they'll never do this or they'll never do that. I would just assume leave that up to the future commission and let them decide that.
Mr. President, I have a question. Maybe for Brian. So when we go and fence this new 3,000 acres and add it to the 22,000 acres, that 3,000 acres already has some free ranging deer, maybe some elk on it. And those then become enclosed in your new fence. Those are really no longer free ranging wildlife of the state.
Mhm.
So you said you do allow some access in there through that hunt area, but that really is restrictive to the public, isn't it?
Yes.
And those herds and I'm not familiar with the area, but that's the problem I have with it, is when we take the public's wildlife and we put them behind a fence, are they still the public's wildlife?
We, when my granddad first started the game farm, there was, I think, 1,000 acres fenced. There were no elk in that vicinity at that time. Now there are a few elk. There are some deer and antelope in there, and we would propose to move them out before we, brought the other part of the ranch into the picture. The elk would be very minor. We did have a big fire go through there 2 years ago, so the deer numbers are very low. There are some antelope, but they can be moved out of there before it's enclosed, if that's what you would prefer.
Yeah, I'm Pete's ahead of me. I haven't talked to local game and fish department people, but there was an opportunity for something like that. If that was feasible, I'd like to have that discussion and see if that's something we could help with.
And then also, as far as, future enlargements, the chasers would be very agreeable to putting a legal description to the 25,000 acres and reducing it from 35 so that it pertains only to that 25,000 acres. So in the future, there's not this subject coming up again. So I think that would be a way to address that, is to go from 35 to 25 and have a legal description attached to the game farm permit.
Well, I don't know if I'm for this, because I don't know if, what about the other wildlife that are in there? Like Commissioner Brokaw, I mean, we've taken, is originally part of it was sold to a different person, purchased back. Now we're going to have 3,000 acres of like Commissioner Brokaw said, of different wildlife possibly in there. And would that be a good move for the commission to do it? Or I don't know. That's my concern, Commissioner Doobie.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with you if we were talking a substantial amount of public land that was on that property and it had public access to begin with. But I don't believe that's the case. I think we're talking about 100% deeded land with no public access. So it is a different scenario than a ranch that would have X percentage of public land with a county road running through it. And then now we're going to cut that off. That's not the case here. So I think they've already said that they would do everything they can to move those critters out of that area before they fence it in. I'm not here to debate whether we should have game farming or not. That's already been decided by our legislature. And how that's going on. To me, the only issue is whether or not we should allow them to put land back into the game farm that was originally allotted to be allowed grandfathered to do that. It's, and in my mind, that's all we're discussing is whether or not that's appropriate or not. If this was a situation where the NX bar came and they wanted to add X amount of acres that had nothing to do with the original allotment, I would be 100% against it. But this is an entirely different scenario, in my opinion. And it's not an area that has public access and that there's already an extreme amount of public use in the first place. So there are some different circumstances regarding this property.
And appreciate that. I just philosophically, I'm just kind of opposed to it. Whether for not really warm to any kind of game farming when it comes to this, but that's just my own thoughts. And that's and my belief. So I understand what you're talking. I appreciate those comments. Anybody comments? More?
Well, Mr. President, I'll make a motion that we do accept the proposal to add additional 3,000 acres and have the department look into the legalities. That way, if we do have a second vote on it, then we could at least discuss it.
So your motion would be to further look into it or to actually do
It
it?
would have to approve the additional 3,000 acres with the condition that the department look into the legalities and the red tape portion, so to speak.
So the motion would be from Commissioner Doobie to approve the 3,000 with the condition for having the department look into the legalities of it.
Right.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Unless our director has a furrowed brow, he may have.
Well, I guess the department needs some specific discretion because the legal question about the commission's authority to approve this, I think has been, we've received that opinion. And the opinion is that the commission has that authority. I think maybe, are you specifically talking about the legal authority to enclose other wildlife?
I guess I'll just flat out state it that my motion is to approve the request.
Okay.
Since we have determined that we do have that authority.
It's been motioned by Commissioner Doobie, seconded by Commissioner Jolovich. Any debate when we talk about it before we?
Mr. President, now we should, if this passes, then I would suggest that the department and them get together on some of the issues that we have regarding trying to move the wildlife out of there before they close it, that type of thing. So that we can eliminate and restrict the amount of free ranging wildlife so far that we're talking about, deer and antelope primarily. And to remove those and push them out of the property as much as possible before it's fenced in.
But I think that, well, and I understand what you're saying, but it won't be long until the 10,000 will be back in front of this commission too. It's too good of a deal. I think that, and it's, I understand your thoughts on, but people are people and time is time. And then I think another commission will, like you say, is going to have to hear that, but
Well, Mr. President, if I may, I'll have to take Brian at his word. And if he's saying that the Chase family would like to come and specify the current 25,000 acres by meets and bounds and eliminate the 35,000, I'd appreciate that. And I'd like to see that. And maybe that would help alleviate future expansion. And if that's what the family's intent is, then it'd be on them to come to the department and define that property boundary to eliminate a future discussion of additional expansion.
Yeah, right now it's not, it's specified by acres, but it's really not defined by a legal description. So if we attach that legal description to the game farm permit, then that's takes the 35,000 acre equation out of the process. So they're very willing to do that. They're very willing to work with the department any way they see necessary. And so I guess I would put my word on that.
so why is it so important for this 3,000 acres?
They own it and it's contiguous with the rest of the property. They would just like to be able to utilize it to their ability. It's not a make or break deal. It's just they own it and it's part of the ranch. Has been just left and then came back.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, we'll put a vote on it. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries that be allowed to do the 3,000 acres.
I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, we'll next move to agenda item number 12, and Dan Smith.
Commissioner Roberts, Nesvik, Commission, good morning. I'm Dan Smith. I'm the Regional Wildlife Supervisor out of the Cody region, and I'm here to present the first of 4 regulations that we're going to be seeking your approval on today. So let's get the slideshow up for me. We're gonna first go over chapter 28, regulation governing bigger trophy game, animal, or game bird or gray wolf damage claims. It does help you turn it on. Thank you. So first, I'd just like to kind of summarize the program history. As you all know, this program dates back to at least 1939. And damage compensation originally was set up just after 1980, where up to 25% of the application fees from non-resident and resident licenses go to maintain a fund of $500,000 to pay wildlife damage. We obviously spend that every year. Right now, we're spending about twice that much, which also comes out of commission dollars. I would say the state of Wyoming has one of the most, if not the most, comprehensive damage process in the United States, if not the whole world. Other states have limits on the number they pay or on which wildlife is covered by damage. And so anecdotally, landowners that I talk to are very satisfied with our damage program. Our damage compensation is based on Wyoming statute 23-1901 and of course the commission regulation chapter 28. So just as kind of an overview of the summary of changes, we have added and clarified definitions and phrases to add clarity to the regulation. And that does it both for the landowner and for the department. It adds clarity to the landowner to see what they actually have to do to qualify for damages. And it adds consistency to game wardens throughout the state to make sure they're applying it equally across the entire state. There are some edits in there that allow us to that says the landowner has to allow adequate hunting in order to qualify for damage. Hunting has always been a qualification for applying for damage. But this is just clarifying it further exactly what you have to allow. Extraordinary damage to grass has been modified to include certain conditions for drought and increased consumption, and I'll cover that a little more later. And we've also added a multiplier for yearlings. So for new definitions, you can see them listed there, and I know you've had them in your notes. You'll notice that most of those we've actually used in the past. So things like open range and pasture setting, you've heard us use those in the past, but we've never actually defined them. And calf and yearling, you've heard us use those in the past, but not actually defined them. So we've actually put those definitions into regulation now, so that it's just clearer for both the landowner and the department. For modified definitions, some of those are just minor word changes, just for clarity, added clarity. We did change the word kill permit to lethal take permit so that we follow the chapter 56 regulation, which is called lethal take permit. So we changed that term throughout the regulation. The one that we did change a little bit is extraordinary damage to grass. And I'd like to spend a little time on that while we're in this definition part. So when we look back earlier this year, we kind of had a scenario come up where, we've always had the situation with extraordinary damage to grass, where if there's a significant increase in wildlife on a property, that we pay that extra. So as an example, if you've always had 100 elk on your property and all of a sudden you have 150 elk on your rangeland, we've tried to compensate for that extra 50 elk that showed up based on AUMs. And that's only for rangeland grass, not cultivated fields. We've always paid full damage on cultivated fields. But a scenario was brought up earlier this year about what about a landowner that's always had the same number of elk, but then due to drought conditions, it's increased the effect that those wildlife have on the property. And so we've tried to put in there in that definition, it's kind of a two-prong approach. So we still have that same prong as before. If there's a significant increase in wildlife, then we can look at paying extraordinary damage to grass, but also added that if there's a drought condition where we have a D2 drought or higher for 8 weeks during the period that wildlife is there, we can also look at some kind of compensation for extraordinary damage to grass under that scenario. So of course, this is going to create, or this is going to result in a lot of cooperation between the landowner and the department to work through that. We've always had really great relationships with our landowners. In my experience, even in the last 8 months reviewing all the damage claims, game wardens in the department really go out of their way to make sure landowners are compensated for what they deserve for wildlife damage.
Mr. President, Dan?
Yes, sir.
How is that going to be monitored? What's the monitoring, or are you going to do that later? Or
That's a great question, and it's going to take some work to do this. There are some tools out there. NRCS has some tools. The county extension has some ability to tell you what kind of production has happened over the past year. So it is going to take a lot of work between the landowner and the department to try to come to what production looks like. How it's going to actually work on the ground is going to vary depending on the location.
so we're going to work with other agencies possibly, or other entities to determine that use.
President Roberts, Commissioner Dubey, yes, we're going to have to try to figure out through whatever tools and means possible to try to figure out what production would be on that rangeland.
Thank you.
So moving on to the trophy game section of the regulations, section 3. Overall, the subsection A was reorganized for clarity. If you read the previous regulation, it kind of jumped around a bit. So we tried to organize that by grizzly bear occupied areas, non-grizzly bear occupied areas, and just tried to reorganize that to make it more clear. We've also provided clarification for what open range setting is and when the multiplier applies. And in a pasture setting, as in the past, there would be no compensation for, there would be no multiplier. There would be just direct compensation for what is lost. And at the request of the commission earlier this year, we did add a multiplier of 1.25 for yearlings, which is why we also added the definition of yearlings and calves into the regulation. In this section, we also noted that the livestock needs to be lawfully present on the land where the damage occurred. On private land, so basically we're trying to not pay for damage for trespass livestock. So as an example, if you had a neighbor that then had all their livestock on one of our WHMAs and then got damaged by trophy game, we would not pay for that because they weren't supposed to be there in the first place. In public land, we're also going to hold livestock producers to their grazing allotment period. So when their allotment ends on the Forest Service and they pull their livestock off, that's when their damage period would end. Moving on to section 4, clarification is added that a claimant would not be eligible for compensation unless they've granted sufficient number of hunters access onto the property for hunting. And we've added also that a claimant will be required to provide documentation of what hunters were allowed access. So that documentation can be in the form of a list of hunters with their name and license number. It can be an enrollment in one of our department Access Yes programs that would qualify for that, or any other department program that allows access onto the property. And the department would work with landowners to try to provide that list as part of their damage claim affidavit. We've added into there that the access has to be sufficient to harvest the number of animals necessary. And so in the past, we've had a little bit of problem with, if we say you need to harvest 20 animals, permission would be granted to 20 hunters. Well, unless there's 100% success, you haven't actually harvested 20 animals. And so we've just clarified this definition to say you need to allow enough access to harvest 20 animals and not necessarily just 20 hunters. In section 5, the notification of filing a damage claim, we've always had a 60-day notification where a landowner needs to notify the department or file their claim within 60 days of when the damage ended. So we clarified this section a little bit to say they also need to file within 60 days of when livestock were lawfully present on a grazing allotment and no later than 60 days from the end of the year. And that will prevent these long-term year after year damage claims continuing on. So no later than 60 days from the last calendar year for bees, hives, and honey, also no later than 60 days from the end of the calendar year. And for all damage claims, the claim shall not exceed 365 days. There's nothing in the regulation that prevents, if damage is still ongoing, from ending the claim and filing it and starting a new claim the next day. Well, what it will prevent is just 2 or 3 year long claims going on and on. Section 6 didn't really have any changes. Section 7 for the reasons for denial. We just further clarified the reasons for denial of a verified claim. And we also added language that if a claimant is compensated under crop insurance, that they basically can't be paid twice. So if you're compensated under crop insurance, you wouldn't be compensated under our damage regulation. If crop insurance only covers half or covers 50% of it, we could still help cover the other 50%. So it doesn't completely eliminate somebody from filing just because they have insurance or are paid from insurance, but we just won't pay on the same damaged property that the insurance already paid on. General reasons for denying a claim, basically big breakdown. I have a few of them listed there, but basically it breaks down to not allowing access or not allowing the department to mitigate the damage at all, either through a hunting season or through riding fencing. And then the only other reason that's really not listed there is that if you miss a filing deadline. Most people don't miss the filing deadline. It usually comes down to one of the other things, whether they're not allowing us to mitigate the problem or not allowing any access. This section also directs the department to deny a claim if we set up a special hunt there, like an auxiliary management hunt or a Chapter 56 hunt, and the landowner charges a fee for us to access the property to do that. If they're going to charge a fee, then they can't apply for damage on that. So around the state, every region, all 8 regions hosted a public meeting. 2 of them submitted comments concerning Chapter 8. We also received 26 comments online, and 3 written comments were mailed in to the Casper Regional Office. This is kind of a list of the basic topics and comments that were provided there. Some of the terms were ambiguous. Obviously, one of the comments was that we should include other vegetation other than grass, and I'll cover that in just a minute. Just a variety, some complimented the regulation, how we had it written, and some were appreciative of the 1.2 multiplier for yearlings. So as part of the department response, throughout the process, went too far there. Throughout the process, we worked on those definitions of extraordinary damage to grass, open range setting, and sufficient number of hunters to try to make sure that they were clear. We determined, after looking at it quite a bit, to continue to define open range setting more specifically than pasture setting, because the multiplier is tied to open range setting, and that's where most of our damage occurs. And so it made the most sense to continue to define that one more specifically. The term extraordinary damage to grass comes from Wyoming statute, and it would exceed the commission's authority to try to add other vegetation to that damage. And so that's why we left it in the grass family. And then we redrafted section 4B, which has to do with that landowners supplying names and hunter license numbers. We made that so it was only on privately owned or leased land or adjoining landlocked federal land, so that it didn't include other public lands that they wouldn't have knowledge of who was on their property. And we also add the statement that if you're involved in a department access program, that would be the proof of providing enough access. And then the only other change that we made there is we made the effective date of January 1st, 2023, which kind of falls at the end of a normal damage cycle. So that would be starting new, so we weren't splitting it in the middle. If we started it today, for example, we'd be splitting some damage periods. So we moved it to a starting date of January 1st, 2023. And after all consideration of public comments, we didn't make any further edits. And so the department recommends that you vote to approve Chapter 28 as proposed, and I would stand for any questions you have.
President. So explain the procedure if you're a landowner that has those wildlife are not there during hunting season. If it's a migration type thing or a winter type thing where they're not on your property during hunting season, they come in there during the winter months or in the summer months, eating your hay crop. As far as the hunter requirement on sufficient hunting.
And so President Roberts, Commissioner Dubey, we would work with that landowner possibly to implement an auxiliary hunting season where they are there, or just try to work with them on providing the access that they can. Obviously, if they aren't there during the hunting season, it makes it pretty difficult for us to kill the recruitment, and we would take that into account and work with them to still qualify for damage.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that won't preclude them from damages in that situation by not allowing sufficient hunting because they're not there to begin with.
President Roberts, Commissioner Dubey, that's correct. We are going to work with the landowner. If they're providing whatever access they can, when animals are there, if they're not there, they're not there. And so we're not going to hold them accountable for killing something that isn't present on their property.
So that doesn't change from current procedure.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. President, I guess I'm kind of hung up on the sufficient number of hunters as well. In an area like ours where the elk move around a lot, how do you determine how many might have been on us for damages in the recruitment, and how many hunters we'd have to have in there?
President Roberts, Commissioner Byrd, that's a great question. And so it's going to take, again, that relationship with the department and the landowner. In some places we may have counts, and if historically they're having damage, we would be trying to do counts. So we would have a number that maybe has been hanging out on specific property, and that's what we're accountable for. We're not going to hold a landowner accountable for an entire herd unit. That's not reasonable. We're trying to hold them accountable for what's actually causing damage on their property. And so in some cases we just flat out ask the landowner, how many how many elk do you think are here? And then we try to work a recruitment out from that. And then once that damage process starts, we're going to start doing counts there. And then year after year, we'd be able to tell roughly how many elk are on that property and what the expectation would be for allowing access.
So if there's 100 that stay there year round, how does that figure out how many hunters you'd have to let in?
So, I'm not knowing the specific location, but if there was 30% recruitment and 60% of the elk of the 100 are cows, 30% recruitment would be about 30 elk or about 20 elk. And so we would ask that 20 elk be removed from that property or try to remove 20 elk.
Right.
Obviously, not everybody's 100%. So if you're making an effort, the department's going to work with the landowner who's making an effort to do that, which is what we've always done. Again, allowing sufficient hunting has been part of the regulation for a long time, and we've always worked with the landowner to try to meet that requirement.
But you use the 30% calf recruitment.
Well, I use that as an
Versus-
example.
yeah.
You'd have to go to whatever specific area that is. That may fluctuate. Maybe it's only 20% in the area you're talking about, or maybe it's 40%, but you would use that based on that area.
Okay, because it's quite a bit higher in the eastern part of the state, isn't it? Was it like 65 or am I off base?
65 per elk would be very high.
Okay. I was thinking it was way higher for the elk, but anyway, the 30% makes sense. Thank you.
So I've been talked to by the hunters, landowners, I'm sorry, hunters and landowners, but mainly landowners that have property that is adjacent to property that allows no hunting. And during the growing season and up to the first or second day of hunting season, they've got quite a few elk. And then the first time they have someone out there hunting to try to get sufficient numbers, the elk are on the private property that aren't allowed to hunt, and they never come back during the hunting season. How is that going to be looked at?
President Roberts, Commissioner Ladwig, if the landowner is making an effort to allow that access, again, if the elk aren't present, then it's very hard to harvest something that's not there. But if the landowner is making an effort to allow access, so he's letting a hunter on there and they're just not successful because the elk aren't there, and there's lots of those scenarios around the state, then that landowner is making that effort and we would work with them on their damage claim.
Okay, thank you.
I know we have an event sheet on the Zoom, but if we were on the next one, I'd like to recognize a great friend of the Game and Fish, Senator John Winter, or House Representative John Winters. Thanks for coming today. We appreciate it. Thanks. So if we go to the Zoom. John, are you there?
Oh, yes, hello. I'm here. I wasn't sure who was up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm I'm President Roberts. Go ahead and we're at the comment section for chapter 28. If you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for the opportunity to provide comment today on Chapter 28. I'll try to keep my comments brief here. My name is John Murtaugh. I'm a representative with Defenders of Wildlife, a national nonprofit conservation organization with 1.2 million members, supporters nationwide, roughly 1,500 of whom are Wyoming residents. We wish to address one specific proposal presented today by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, which is the recommendation that landowners must provide access to hunters to be eligible for compensation. It is our position that this would infringe upon the private landowner's rights. It would create a perverse incentive that is itself in direct contrast with the application of non-lethal tools and techniques to mitigate damages from predators like wolves. This requirement would render moot a landowner's desire to manage wildlife without lethal means. Studies on pack behavior have suggested that hunting can disrupt the social structure of a pack and can increase the risk of predation on livestock. Encouraging a landowner to permit hunting of wolves in order to receive compensation may therefore increase the rate of losses for that landowner, thereby counteracting the intent damage mitigation is in the first place. This move appears an attempt to appease sports persons at the expense of private landowners, which further risks the efficacy of the program utilized to minimize damages from wolves. We ask that you reject the proposal to require hunting access as a means of receiving compensation and protect the privilege of choice on behalf of landowners. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions?
Not to the comments.
No.
Mr. President, I have a question for Dan, if
Okay.
we're going to circle back to that. Earlier when we changed the multiplier on yearlings to 1.25. As I recall, the department was going to work with stock growers and continue to do research on that to see if that was adequate. Did that get done? What did we find anything out? Because at that meeting, there was talk about going to a 1.5. As I recall, but we settled on the 1.25 till further homework could be done. I'm a little fuzzy on those details, but Dan, can you help me out with that? Was there conversations with stock growers about that?
Yes, President Roberts, Commissioner Brokaw. So research is ongoing now in the upper green. Clint Atkinson is doing research, marking livestock, and then going in on kill sites to see why they die. So that is ongoing, and we will continue to make adjustments as necessary based on his research when it's done.
Thank you. Another question. I appreciate your definition changes. When you take out minimum number requirements in that, and it's now sufficient numbers. And so thinking of my area and my situations, I know the department's intent is honorable to help those landowners that are eligible. But when that relation, and it's completely dependent on the relationship between local field staff and that landowner. When that relationship goes sideways, and it's hard to define in statute, I get, but what then is the department, what do you recommend then when those talks break down? Now we've got a conflict between counts and you didn't count the right place and at the right time. And how do we negotiate through that?
President Roberts, Commissioner Brokaw, that's a tough situation. So I know in your area, there are some of those breakdowns and we are working to repair those. And so that's when, the expectation is that we're going to act in a professional manner, regardless of what our personal feelings are. And so the expectation of the field staff is to do your job and to do it well. And so if that's not occurring, that's when a supervisor steps in and tries to help out with that, or another person can step in and just help build that relationship. But I would say to a landowner to continue to try to work on that, to try to work with the department on the relationship, because I think in most cases we can work through those.
I agree. I appreciate that. And that's the discussion I had was we can't really, the commission, get in the weeds and statute of how to deal with personal relationships. We can't statute people's behavior. So I knew that's what you were going to say, but I just needed it on the record that we had the discussion that the department is professional, above board. I have no doubt to that. And just, I guess, bringing awareness to it, that the department has those expectations, has those field employees. And
Thank you, Commissioner Brokaw.
likewise, the landowner then has an equal obligation to be honest, forthright, and honorable as well in those negotiations. So it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I wanted, is Mr. Murtaugh, is he still there? I want to apologize to him for cutting him so off so quick, but is he offline? But if you can hear me, Mr. Murtaugh, I apologize for the way we exited that, but I appreciate it. Appreciate your comments from that. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. President,
Mr. DB?
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay,
I move we expect the department's recommendation on chapter 28.
I second.
okay, it's been motioned by Commissioner Doobie, seconded by Commissioner Brokoff to approve chapter 28 with modifications proposed by the department. Correct?
Mr.
Okay.
President, I also like to say that one of the things that I was fortunate and happy to see was a lot of the public thinks there's tons and tons of ranchers getting damage payments. And I was surprised to see how few actually apply for damages. It's not the other way around. There's not an overabundance of ranchers trying to get this quote money for damages, whatever. It's few of them. And they're mostly all very well deserved and justified. So that's one thing I was pleasantly surprised to see, that how few ranchers actually apply for damages.
And I commend them too. They're very conscientious about it. Even the ranchers that take us to task all the time are very, very conscientious about it. So we appreciate them. Thank you for the comments. Okay, we're ready to vote on the motion. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you, Commission.
Okay. Chief King.
I think you heard that.
Help me figure this one out you're gonna do here.
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission, I appreciate the opportunity to talk through a revised draft chapter 34 regulation, our auxiliary management hunting season. Just as a little bit of a refresher, we've talked quite a little bit over the last year about some of our elk management challenges on private land across the state, and the need for us to have a adequate toolbox to implement in areas and scenarios where we need to have maximum flexibility to address our elk damage situations, particularly elk. And so we were directed by the commission to take a look at existing tools and revamp those if necessary. And one of those tools that we recognized was our existing Chapter 34 depredation season. We went, took a hard look at that and increased, in summary, we increased the flexibility of this regulation for us to effectively implement and utilize it. And so I'll step through the changes that we're proposing with you today. So this regulation hasn't been changed or modified in a long time. There was some slight modifications done in 2014. Those were really just some minor tweaks that didn't have any impact on how this chapter was utilized. And we have not used a depredation season in a long time. Just to clarify that comment up there, since 2014, we haven't used a depredation season, but really prior to that, it had been many years, probably back to about 2004 was the last time we used a depredation season. So it's been a long time. It hasn't been used as we've previously identified it. It was kind of an older and outdated process. And so again, we took a hard look at this and modernized it and we'll make this a much more effective tool for the department to utilize. So I'll just step through some of the changes in the regulation. As Section 3 outlines, the chief game warden or his designee we'll be able to determine the need for an auxiliary management season and work with cooperating landowners to designate the area opened, the opening and closing dates, the maximum number and type of licenses to be issued, the number, sex, and species of big game animals, trophy game animals, or wild turkeys to be taken during that season. And just to be clear, the way that we envision this process working is that our local folks, district biologists and game wardens will work with local landowners to identify a need and identify the specifics for a season, and then bring that forward to the chief game warden for consideration, and then to the local district commissioner whose area that is in for final approval. So we envision these proposals basically coming up from the field level in conjunction with a cooperating landowner. We'll get to this a little bit later, but there was some concern that the chief game warden, rather hurtful comment actually, that the chief game warden shouldn't be setting these up by himself. So just to be clear, we are relying on our field folks to work with landowners to identify situations where this tool would be effective. In section 4, made just some minor changes there. We outlined that department personnel may accompany hunters participating in an auxiliary management hunting season. They do not have to, but we have that ability if the need is there. That section B, I want to focus in on there because there were some comments related to section 4B. So the new added language says any hunter who participates in an auxiliary management hunting season and who refuses to take an available animal as directed by department personnel shall not be allowed to continue to participate in that specific auxiliary management hunt. I just want to clarify that that's not us directing people to take shots, for example, that they're not comfortable with. It's simply there for us that if a person was participating in this hunt and, for example, wanted to take a bull, but our season only offered a cow hunt, we're not there to debate that. And we're just simply, if an opportunity for a hunter exists, but for whatever reason, they do not want to take that opportunity, we'll move on and find somebody that will, but it's not there for us to tell them to take shots they're not comfortable with. So in section 6, we address bag limits. We have taken out the let's see, whoops, now we're jumping all over. So I skipped over section 5. So let me go back to section 5. We did specify that the department could authorize the use of unused licenses that are currently valid in a particular hunt area to be utilized in an auxiliary management hunting season. And we also in section E clarified that holders of an auxiliary management hunting season are exempt from the provision in commission regulation limiting the number of licenses an individual may possess in any one calendar year, meaning that if a person participating in an auxiliary management hunt so desired or the opportunity was there, they could be issued more than one license. And having a hard time. In section 6, bag limits, we just to clarify, the bag limit still exists. It's one animal per license. And just to clarify again, that a person participating in this hunt could purchase more than one license. Section 7 clarifies that the hunters participating in an auxiliary management hunting season may be required to have their animal inspected by department personnel and may be required to allow the collection of samples for disease testing. In most cases, we do anticipate that we will require a collection of CWD samples from animals harvested in this season. Section 8 clarifies that all other commission regulations apply to these hunting seasons. The department held a series of meetings across the state and accepted comments at those meetings as well as online comments. We received about 21 total, and I'll step through. Those have been summarized here. I think that we heard quite a bit of concern, I would say, from sports persons who are, maybe to paraphrase their comments, cautiously or a little bit reserved about this chapter 34 being implemented. I think there's a general consensus of support, but what I think it really boils down to is folks are on the sideline watching to see how the department implements this season. And so I think it'll be up to us to use discretion and apply this chapter 34 tool when and where applicable, but to do so in a very cognizant manner and to utilize it where our existing hunting season frameworks just don't fit the bill, or where it becomes too cumbersome and burdensome in the existing regulation to address specific issues. So like I mentioned a while ago when we talked, I view the seasons that could come out of this auxiliary management season as more of a surgical tool rather than making really complex regulations in our existing chapters. We have an ability with this to create something that's more flexible, more precise, and address very specific issues. There were some comments that this really should be used for antlerless big game animals only and not for bucks and bulls. And I would echo that just from my perspective and the situations that I know that we're trying to address. The focus needs to be on antlerless harvest. That's how we address population objectives, and that's how we manage populations, is through antlerless and doe-fawn, cow-calf, doe-fawn harvest. And so I think that's really important for us, that I would fully anticipate that is going to be the focus of these seasons. And we did have some comments about license fee structures. It is my recommendation that we follow the existing reduced price license fee structure that the commission currently has in place in chapter 44, and not modify the license fee structures. One of the things that I think is important for us to consider or to keep in mind is that we don't want to circumvent our existing regulatory mechanisms in place. We want to use this chapter 34 as a supplement to, rather than a workaround, our existing frameworks, licensing requirements, et cetera. So that is my recommendation, to stay true to the license prices that we have outlined in chapter 44 for reduced price licenses. With that, so based on public comment, we did not make any additional changes to the draft that was put out. With that, I'll stand for any questions, but it would be my request to the commission that you accept chapter 34 as modified and presented to you today.
It- Is this needed? And why?
Yeah, President Roberts, it's a good question. And I strongly believe that we do need this tool. We really have some significant challenges in dealing with elk damage in parts of the state. And I think we've tried, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox, and we've utilized those to the best extent that we possibly can. But there still are places where the existing season frameworks become very convoluted and complex and are not helping us address the problem. And so in very specific cases where we have a landowner that's experiencing damage, and we can create a very specific season that gets at addressing the root cause of that damage, we can do so with this regulation. And so I feel strongly that we need this tool in the toolbox to address our challenges.
It seems like we're setting a season and then another season, kind of a,
President, I think this is a remarkable regulation. I think one of the things that the public is concerned and is sitting there waiting to see is that we don't jump to it too quickly, and that we don't go through every procedure possible to get hunters to handle these situations, and that we just jump that procedure and go straight to this. I don't see this happening very often in our state on an annual basis, but only in very extreme circumstances. I think it's fairly abundant, the information out there that more hunters doesn't necessarily mean more harvest. And in some of these areas, they do allow a lot of hunters. And when they come on there, they go, just as Commissioner Ladwig said, they go on to the neighbors where they can't be harvested. So sometimes it takes fewer people to get more of these critters where they have multiple licenses. This is not designed to be a fair chase, so to speak, hunt type thing. This is a management tool in extreme circumstances to control damage and control numbers where possible. So I think it's a remarkable type regulation. I think it allows this department to surgically go into areas that they're having trouble. But I think the public is waiting to make sure that we don't have a quick trigger on this. That's what I think.
how do you decide who gets to hunt?
Yeah, President Roberts, that'll be, again, those specifics will come about from local biologists and game wardens working with the landowner. And if the landowner is willing and interested to allow members of the public to participate in this hunt, then we will go to work to help find hunters. But if they already have folks that know the property and that they trust, then we will go ahead and issue licenses directly to those folks that they feel comfortable allowing access onto their property. I think as Commissioner Dewey pointed out, there are cases where it can be really tough. You can mess up an elk hunt in a hurry if you don't do it right. And so I think it's going to be a case by case basis in terms of how many hunters are going to participate and who those hunters are. But in all cases where we can, we will encourage and try to use public hunters, but that may not be the case everywhere.
I mean, who decides? I mean, hunter comes in, has lived in the town a couple of years, doesn't know really anybody. And then said, if you've lived there 20, 30 years and have a good rapport, you get to go on the hunt, but the other person that they don't even know exists or doesn't know that things exist, it doesn't seem very fair to me, because it seems pretty subjective. Just you're picking and choosing who you decide to go.
Yeah, President Roberts, just to that, I would comment that we're talking about private land and private landowners, and I think that they need to feel very comfortable about who would participate in this hunt. And again, a case by case basis, We hope that this provides some public access in places, but it may not. There may be some places where it's just, given the nature of the hunt that needs to occur there, it may require just some very specific folks that are authorized to participate in this hunt.
Mr. President. Now, no, we had a deal, I guess, happen on our place, but we need to get some cow elk killed. We let a guy come in, brought his teenage son. They were in there early, got their elk. They were out mid-afternoon, in and out, didn't mess up anything or run the elk off. Another one brought his teenage daughter in a year later. They might show up at 2 p.m, go up there and drive around and look, leave at 5, in and out multiple times, disrupting the elk, making it hard for everybody else, and never killed one. So in areas where we need to get them killed, we need the people that are serious, that can get in there, get it done, and get out.
Mr. President, I would add, this isn't a fun hunt. This is a management tool. This is a surgical address a serious problem, this is not public sport. This is just, to me, more appeasing and a better appetite than how they used to do it with depredation hunts. And so I think it provides a service to the landowner. I think it provides a service to the species for some health management in that herd management that we try so hard to do in our multiple layers of public seasons and all that, and we're just not getting it done. And so I think it's necessary. Question I had at home, do you envision these running concurrently with open seasons? And I said, probably not. We would probably let the general hunt season conclude, see what we got done. And an auxiliary management hunt would be more of a pinpoint targeted effort, winter conditions, herd dynamics, and those kind of procedures. Is that how you see it working out too, Rick?
President Roberts, Commissioner Brokaw, I think in most generally, those would be factors that we would take into account. Is there an existing season in place? Are there hunters available to address the problem then and there without utilizing this? And if so, we don't need this tool. But if the season isn't in place, the licenses weren't available or those type of factors were in play, then this tool could come in and fill that gap.
I mean, I really don't have a problem with the hunt. I just have a problem with the selection of the hunt is my concern. In all fairness to me, you have folks that are in constant communication with the warden up and down all the time. Then you have other folks that you never hear of that just enjoy a hunt and do it. My concern is I don't want to turn it into any kind of a favoritism type of thing, even though it's needed. Is there any kind of a process to make sure that everybody has a fair chance? I mean, because you say, oh, I need 5 elk killed or 10 elk killed. Well, chances are that the warden has come in communication. He knows 5 or 10 that have just always been, or she's been getting dinged on, and that's who the natural tendency will be to call and say, hey, do you want to hunt this deprivation hunt? But the poor guy or the poor gal that just doesn't know anybody or doesn't know any warden or anything, I feel they're being left out unfairly because of this. Doesn't make them any less hunters, it just makes they're less vocal or less in the sign. So and we all respect our wardens as far as they're very, very good at that, but the public perception just kind of, and the fairness of it kind of suits me the wrong way. So,
Mr. President, how big of a problem is the cooperation of the landowners on the auxiliary management hunts?
So President Roberts, Commissioner Jolovich, like I said, we haven't used a depredation season in a long time. And so I think that in the past, when we used these seasons, we had great landowner cooperation. We didn't put one into place without landowner cooperation lined up. And I anticipate that that's exactly what will be required to implement one of an auxiliary management season. we're going to have a willing and cooperating landowner that'll work with the department to set up the parameters of this season and to utilize the tool. So it's going to be dependent on having cooperation from the private landowners.
Thank you.
I mean, seems as how it's on private land. I mean, you have no choice. We're not going to set an auxiliary management season in an area where we don't have access. So, I mean, and I understand that you're Commissioner Roberts, President Roberts, your concerns on that. And I think it just remains to be seen. Each situation will probably be different. There'll probably be one rancher that says, I don't care who comes, design it, make it work. And they can do that. And there'll be another rancher that says, I do care who comes. And I have 8 or 9 guys that want to take the comment that I like the best on a lot of those, not necessarily like the best, but was to make sure this wasn't a commercial venture to where they weren't making money off of this procedure, to where they weren't guided or the landowner wasn't charging for the right to come on for this auxiliary management. And I would hope that would never be the case in this particular type of tool, that it is used for financial gain.
You mentioned that when these folks will be they'll be with a warden the whole time. Is that the intent, or they just have access to do this hunt?
Yeah, President Roberts. So the commission or the regulation as it reads now, it provides for a provision that the department could have department employees go with hunters that participating in this hunt. That it doesn't, I don't intend that we will do that in every situation, but the regulation does have that provision that we can accompany them on the hunt if we so desire. And I could envision situations where a landowner has a great deal of concern about who is on the place, but we could address that concern by agreeing to accompany the hunters participating in the hunt, for example. It's a lot of work on the department, but those are the kinds of things that we are willing to do to address these chronic elk depredation situations.
It's just too subjective. I don't know, but that's me. By the way,
Chief King, when I was a young man, they had a depredation, quote unquote, hunt on the Cheyenne River out there. And if I remember correct, there was an application period, just like we do with the normal hunting licenses. And the successful applicants, of course, got to go hunt on the property. Is there time restraint or a reason that can't be done to where, like we're talking, to make it probably a little more accessible to the public and fair to the public?
President Roberts, Commissioner Ladwig. So in the old depredation regulation, section 5, it outlined that whole process that we used to follow about when a person would submit an application for a depredation season that may or may not exist yet. And we had waiting lists, and that was all really cumbersome. And so our intent here with these modifications was to make it much more flexible and be able to implement something quickly and address those situations that we may not anticipate that arise, and we need an ability to put something in place quickly. And so that's why this rewrite has all that flexibility in terms of working with a cooperating landowner to identify who they'll provide access to, and then using our electronic licensing system to get those licenses issued as quickly as possible.
It still seems like it could be a favoritism thing. I think I've already heard that word.
I would just add too that, under the old version of this regulation, it was pretty cumbersome to go through the list.
Mhm.
You'd have a depredation season or a need on one side of the state, but people applying from the other side of the state and trying to coordinate all the logistics to get them to the place they needed to be was pretty tough. And that's why this enhanced flexibility has been written into this draft, that when a situation arises, we need to be able to act quickly.
well,
Thank you.
what about like seniors or youth hunters or disability hunters on something on this kind of a thing without using just opening it up to those folks?
Yeah, President Roberts, I think that there's nothing in here that would preclude us from doing that. And if a landowner had that desire and ability, we would certainly work with them and other entities to make that happen. But yeah, there's nothing in here that would preclude that from happening.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yes, are we done with discussion? I would make the motion that we accept chapter 34 as presented.
Okay, it's been motioned by Commissioner Byrd to present, approve chapter 34 as modified and presented to the commission. And we have a second.
My second.
Commissioner Brokaw has seconded that. All those in, oh no,
Is there any
discussion.
public? Is there any public comment on this? Any blue
Discussion.
sheets? I'm asking for public comment. Mr. President, is there any blue sheets? Anybody on the public on this one?
No, I haven't heard it from anybody.
Very good.
Any further discussion from the commission or anybody from the public want to weigh in now or hearing none, those in favor signal aye.
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 Those opposed? Ayes have it. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do the awards and recognition for Director Nesbitt. Can you go ahead and take this one?
So, Mr. President, members of the commission, good morning. We have today with us Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, who is definitely no stranger to the commission. They've been a partner of Wyoming hunters and sportsmen and women and the department and the commission for a very long time. They're here again today to provide another donation to our Access Yes program. And I think it's of note. I'll let Sean come up here and speak to you and address the commission. But to date, Rocky Mountain Elk has donated $157,500 in 9 years. And today they're intending to provide another donation. This has opened up approximately 42,000 acres of otherwise inaccessible land to hunters and anglers in 2022. So I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thanks for letting me speak today. Sorry, I was a little, had a little conflict this morning, but I appreciate you guys fitting me in. I would just like to add that in those numbers that he read to you, that the Access Yes, it's we fully funded every request that since I've been here in 3 years. So we're very proud of the access that you guys provide for the hunters and anglers. That is one of the biggest initiatives that our members and our donors, the people that support our RMEF, want to see, is the ability to go help manage the habitat and manage the herd. And in order to manage the herd, we have to have the access to manage the herd. So the fact that every year we get a donation request from the Game and Fish and the commission to be able to provide more access is absolutely top priority for us. In the 3 years that we've done the ranking system, the Access Yes program is always number one on top. And I'd like to personally take the time to thank Ian Tater for his time that he's invested in RMEF and the process that we go through our funding cycle. He does a lot for the Game and Fish and for our PAC process. And without his due diligence, we would not be where we're at. And I'm proud to say that we are one of the top fundraising states in the entire nation with the lowest population. And we probably put more money back on the ground through the Game and Fish than any other agency almost in the entire nation, just through the Wyoming Game and Fish. So we've always enjoyed our partnership with Wyoming Game and Fish and the commission, and we look forward to the years to come.
With that. Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break and then we'll reconvene. Okay, we're back in session. Next on the item will be number 14. Dan?
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, Commission, Chapter 35 regulation is up next, and we've asked Mike Choma to present that.
Thank you, Dan. Morning, Commissioners, Director Nesbitt. Fire it up here. I'll just give you a preview as they're warming up the presentation, the slide presentation. So Chapter 35, the hunting permit regulation for persons with disabilities, was previously modified back in 2016. And prior to that time was 2013. So you can see that we don't do modifications and edits to this regulation on a regular basis, but just kind of as needed. And so this time there were some constituents that asked for some additional clarity to be provided into this regulation, and specifically for those persons that have prosthetic devices. They wanted to make sure that a prosthetic device was included in what we previously had termed a mechanical device for aiding a person in their mobility. And so there was a small group of people, and Commissioner Lundvall was involved in this whole process. There was a small group of us that started out brainstorming that if we're going to open up this regulation, what else may need to be modified or changed, and how can we best serve our constituents with this modification? So we had several discussions, and some things we included in this draft regulation that I'll go through with you, and some things we didn't. We're just going to kind of put those on a back burner. They were just bigger issues, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So starting right off, see if I'm smart enough to move this thing forward. Okay, starting right off at the top of the regulation, of note is the effective date for any of these changes that get approved today will be January 1 of 2023. And there's a specific reason for that. We didn't want to affect any kind of a change to this regulation during the ongoing hunting seasons for individuals that already have permits that are authorized. So we didn't want to cause confusion during the 2022 seasons. And so we'll start fresh in 2023. And the department's got some initial plans already identified where we're going to, we'll do some reach out to those persons that already have permits. We'll let them know prior to the beginning of the next calendar year what these changes are that are going to be approved today, and how that may affect them, and processes that they may want to take in order to get updated permits if necessary. So we'll start right there. And then we're going to get into some terms that are used specifically in this regulation. I need to let you know that some of the terms that we use in this regulation are statutory terms. And so that this commission gets their authority through statutory language, but these terms are not defined currently in statute. So that gives the commission the authority to go ahead and define them for these regulatory purposes. So you'll see that we've got a term, disabled hunter or handicapped hunter, disabled hunter companion. All of these terms are specific statutory terms. And so we don't really have the flexibility to change those terms, but we do have the flexibility to change how they're defined. And one of the first things that we selected to do is to try to make the process for permits more simplified. So by that, I mean, in the past, we've had a process and a permit called a disabled hunter permit. And we've also had a shoot from a vehicle permit that had very similar
baseline requirements, but they were just a slightly different. And we were able to modify and combine those two permits into one. So if a person qualifies for one, now they'll get both, instead of having to go through a separate application process, have separate paperwork, and just try to simplify it, looking at how it's really utilized on the ground and how it's going to help our constituents. We'll get into that just a little bit more later on. So we did further modify the definition of disabled hunter. We added or handicapped hunter. And then we also modified the definition of a walker to mean that a mechanical device designed to assist a person's ability to walk that has multiple legs and requires the use of both hands to move. So we just did some of this for some additional clarity. There was some question in the past that had come in, some comment from the public. And so we took this opportunity to modify these things. In section 4, there's just really some housekeeping changes because we did remove an entire section from this chapter. And so we had to renumber where those additional sections were referenced within the document. In section 5, we made edits to clarify that a person who's unable to walk at all times without the use of a wheelchair, scooter, walker, cane, crutches, prosthetic, or some other mechanical device may apply for disabled hunter permit. So that's where some of that clarification came in about those persons that need prosthetic devices for mobility. Section 6, talk about persons who qualify for a disabled hunter permit also being authorized to shoot from a stationary vehicle to take wildlife. And as I previously said, those used to be two separate permit application processes, two separate permits that an individual needed to carry in the field to validate that they qualified for those permits. And if this draft moves forward in its current form, when we issue one, it's going to say both disabled hunter and shoot from the vehicle authorization in the same permit. Just for clarification, a disabled hunter permit really only authorizes that individual to have a companion, a disabled hunter companion who can be signed up, get a permit to help out a disabled hunter. And if the disabled hunter shoots and injures an animal and doesn't have the physical capacity to follow up and put the finishing shot in, the disabled hunter companion has the opportunity to go take that follow-up shot and then reduce the animal to possession, and it still has the still gets the disabled hunter's license affixed to it. So that's the only thing that a disabled hunter permit really authorized previously. As I mentioned, the old Section 8 has been completely removed from this regulation because it only addressed the shoot from a vehicle permit, but now we've got that combined into the disabled hunter permit. So the provisions that used to be in this Section 8 are already incorporated in the disabled hunter section. Sections 8 and 9 received no edits for this draft. Section 10 did have an edit. It's in the revocation and denial of a permit. And we removed the provision that had said a disabled hunter companion while assisting the disabled hunter, it allows a disabled hunter to violate any provision of Title 23. We removed that because it's really unnecessary in this regulation. We already have a statute that addresses an accessory to committing a wildlife violation. So this was really unnecessary and unneeded in this rule. I might have jumped too far. And then some edits in Section 12, just provide additional clarity and consistency with similar language in other regulations. Move on to the public comment portion of our regulation drafting process. The department received one comment on the website and one comment that was in written form. Both of those comments were provided to you in your notebooks. Each of our wildlife regions held public meetings across the state. We didn't have any further written comments that were provided at those public meetings. And that one written comment did just show up at the Casper Region office addressed to the regulations section, which is me. It's tough to read it on the screen, but one of the comments that came in asked that we consider giving the authority to game wardens in the field, that if they feel that an individual is out there and physically doesn't show any signs of disability, that the permit could be revoked. And I can see what the individual was getting at, but that's not the whole case, because there are qualifying disabilities that would not be visible. And so we couldn't make an edit into the regulation to address that person's concern, but I can see what they were talking about. In essence, what they were concerned about is people that may abuse the permit system. They may get an authorization signed by a physician and that they don't necessarily qualify for, but visibly, we can't just go by visible attributes. The other comment requested consideration for other disabilities not presently outlined in the regulation. In this case, the individual is asking for the opportunity for a family member of a disabled person to be able to utilize their license. And in essence, that would be a transferable license. And we don't have a provision for that. And there is an opportunity for a disabled hunter companion for, the reducing to possession after the disabled hunter had put an injuring shot into an animal. So after consideration of these comments, the department made no further edits to this draft regulation. Brian. Help me out, Samuel, and go one more. Here we go. So at this point in my presentation, the department would recommend the commission vote to approve Chapter 35, hunting permit regulations for disabled or for persons with disabilities as proposed. And with that, I would stand for question or open up some further information sharing.
First of all, I want to thank Mike. I don't know if you know what he was getting roped into when I asked him to start working on this. So publicly wanted to thank you for all the work you've done on this. I also want to mention Terry Skinner, the president of Wyoming Disabled Hunters, is someone that I've worked with in the past, and he's been vital in working on all this with us as well. I also just want to commend Wyoming and the department in general. I've been fortunate to hunt as a hunter with a disability all across the country, and Wyoming does lead the way in making sure that we have the right resources and access and availability so that hunters with disabilities can get out in the field. And so I think that that's something that we should be proud of. Like Mike mentioned, we'll probably come back before the commission. Hopefully it'll be a little longer before we do it, but there is a whole nother section that we do need to tackle. But this was definitely something that got us started on the right way. Hopefully we'll make it available for more folks with disabilities to get out, while at the same time closing up some of those loopholes that were unfortunately being abused by folks that didn't need to be doing that. So I think it's a great step in the right direction, and we'll take a little breather from it and then maybe attack it again on another route. But just again, wanted to say thank you to everybody that was involved in this.
And thank you for tackling that. Any other questions?
All right, Mr. President, I have a question, maybe clarification better. So annually, a disabled hunter has to apply for their disability permit?
That's incorrect. President Roberts, Commissioner Brokaw, these permits, most of these permits are for the life of the individual, as long as they still have a qualifying disability.
Okay, good.
There are provisions that if someone has a temporary disability, they can get a temporary permit, and that will end at the end of a calendar year.
Okay.
Or prior, if that condition no longer exists.
Good. I didn't catch that. I didn't read that. So that streamline that's good thinking.
Okay, right now we're looking for a motion to approve chapter 35 as modified and presented to the commission. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Oh, Commissioner Lundvall has
Second.
moved. Second is from Commissioner Jolovich. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, signal aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be item number 15 on the chapter 62, aquatic invasive species.
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, Commission. This is the last of the four regulations for you to look at today. And then hopefully this will be one of the easiest ones. So we're looking at chapter 62, aquatic invasive species. There was one proposed change made in two places in section 7, and it's extending the timeline from 15 days to 30 days that your temporary decal or that your proof of purchase applies. The reason for that is just basically mailing delays that we've had where people weren't receiving their decals in the mail in an appropriate time. So we've extended that, doubled the time from 15 to 30 days. We did have this in public meetings as part of the other regulations. We did receive one comment that wasn't really related to the change. The suggestion in the comment was to do away with printing AIS decals and the entire requirement to display the decal, and instead just have the watercraft operator maintain a receipt in their as a like a registration or on their phone or something like that. While this would save some AIS printing and mailing costs, it also puts an additional burden on the operator to maintain that receipt. And so we did not make any edits on that. And so the department recommends that you vote to approve chapter 62 as proposed. And I stand for questions.
Another comment. Is there been any kind of a, this AIS, is there any kind of synchronization from the other states to do something more unified? I know that I've taken the opportunity I got onto Utah's. I took like a 3-hour test, it seemed like, and then I got done with the test and passed it, and they said, thank you. There was no decal, there was no permit, no anything. But has there been any, is there any kind of a standardization that it seems everything in this aquatic invasive species things is so everybody's so, I think we're so far out in front of everybody else. It's ridiculous. Are they gonna take it serious enough to put some money into it and to really work on it, or is there any talk to get things standardized, come some sort of a compact with the other states or anything?
So President Roberts, that's a great question. I may have to defer some of that to our fisheries chief back there. But I do know that we are collecting, when we do inspections, we are putting that into a database, and other states are doing that as well, the ones that are doing inspections. And so it is real time that when you go through a check station here and we enter that data that it's been inspected or hasn't been inspected, the next check station that they go to, whether it's our state or another state using that program, they can pull up and see that where they've last been and where it was last inspected. But as far as synchronizing between states and getting other states on board, that's a great question. And how do we motivate other states to take it as seriously as we are?
And Mr. President, there's varying levels of priority. I mean, if you look at the state we talked about yesterday with South Dakota, they essentially already lost the war. And so their priority for investing a ton of money into aquatic invasive species is a lot lower than ours because we're still winning the war and we don't have any. And so when I say any, I mean just zebra and quagga mussels. So it varies. I know that Idaho is similar to us, and Idaho works very well with us and coordinates on our aquatic invasive species efforts. Montana to a similar level, and then the other states, you know, it's a lot different because they've already all have aquatic invasive species. So the best thing that I know of now that is very helpful is this data sharing that that you all heard about when we were in Evanston. Dan just talked about it a little bit here. And then continuing to talk as far as any kind of a compact. I don't know that there's at least financially an interest from the other states in any kind of a compact. They all look at it differently than we do probably. I think the bigger issue here is how we leverage additional funds that are not in the commission's general fund to help with this problem. And the reason is that right now, this entire prevention effort is borne on the backs of essentially Wyoming boaters and then to another level, Wyoming sportsmen. And the consequences of aquatic invasive species, specifically zebra quagga mussels being in our state, are very wide ranging. Municipal water supplies, water treatment facilities, hydroelectric power generation, obviously the biological impacts at lakes, marina owners, small businesses. So that the consequences of us, if we fail at our prevention efforts, are significant and should not be borne. And I don't believe even the prevention effort should be borne solely on the backs of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. So, you know, that this isn't a new thing. I've talked with the legislature about this. I've talked with the governor's office about this. We have received some help with the response from the governor's office if there were needed to be one. But this continues to be a challenge for us to try to get other state entities on board with trying to financially help us out here.
Thank you.
Mr. President, a couple things. I agree completely with Director Nesvik said. So how can the commission help? What's the commissioner's role in touching those other state agencies and helping them realize their responsibility and help fund our AIS efforts? How can the commission help? Well, you think on that one, Mr.
President,
Smith.
Well,
Roberts,
we've
Commissioner Brokaw, I
expanded,
don't have-
we discussed it yesterday and we're expanding it on today. And I think we're just.
I have some ideas on that. And again, we should get back to Dan's topic, but I have some ideas on that. And I think that, you know, I'll talk offline with President about some ways we might be able to exert some influence, as long as it's the will of the commission to look for other funding sources outside of game and fish. I'm assuming from all my discussions with all of you, that's the case. So
To focus, Mr. Smith, back on your chapter at hand. Yesterday, we heard about though a few. There are those people pulling boats that are timing their travel and routes to avoid our inspection stations. Is there strong enough language in here for violations to hold those people accountable and pinch them hard enough to make it hurt?
President Roberts, Commissioner Brokaw, I believe there are. Just recently in the Cody region, we actually intercepted a boat already on the water that came from another state. He was issued a citation, which has a pretty significant fine to it. Unfortunately, as Chief Osterlin and as Director Nesvik has said, once the damage is done, the damage is done. So when you do something in hindsight, it's it may be too late, but I think the things that we have set up and the things that we are trying to do, short of manning a check station 24 hours a day at every entry to the state, we need people to take responsibility. And as one of the commissioners said yesterday, most people want to do the right thing and they don't want to be that guy that brings it in. So I think we have regulatory mechanisms in place. And we'll just have to do the best that we can to try to keep it out.
Very good.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve chapter 62 as presented?
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Commissioner Ladwig,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Byrd. Any discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor signify aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next, we'll be going to agenda item number 16. Doug, on the elk license allocation history and proposed regulations timeline.
Good morning, Mr. President, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission. So this presentation is informational to provide you a little background. As you know, the meeting in July, the commission made a recommendation for the department to start moving forward with this process. And so we are going to, I've got a few slides to talk through the history of this and talk a little bit about kind of where we're at with elk populations. And so any way to get that little black box moved up in maybe the upper corner. So what I'm going to cover is the task force recommendation, a little bit on the license allocation history and current elk license allocation process, agency review, and then some of the next steps that we plan to take and how we're going to come back to the commission. So as you know, the task force recommendation came out earlier this year, and the task force is recommending that the removal of the 7250 cap on those non-resident elk licenses. And they wanted us also to consider establishing and adopting regions, non-resident regions, general elk regions, implement that process for determining those quotas that would consider the elk herd objectives, access to public hunt, the access to hunting opportunity, and then the resident hunting experience. And so we're talking through those things now. So what we wanted to talk a little bit about is kind of the pros and cons of removing the 7250. Basically, if it was removed, it would allow our managers to set those quotas locally like we do with mule deer right now. We could control bull harvest a little more specifically into those geographic regions. So if you drew a geographic range around similar to our deer regions, the managers could set something specific to that area. We could direct more harvest to those private lands. As you know, in eastern Wyoming, that's where we heard from those landowners at the January commission meeting in Cheyenne. There's landowners in the eastern part of the state that came and voiced some concerns. In some ways, the drawing would be simplified because non-residents wouldn't be competing on a statewide basis. They would be looking at a small geographic area. But on the other hand, it does create another layer of complexity with the draw because right now it's just one standard 70, general license they put in for. Now they would have to specifically ask for that geographic range of the state. Non-residents could have a better way to plan for their hunt if they were choosing to hunt general because they would be picking a certain part of the state. And there is a potential to reduce non-resident crowding in that non-residents would be required to stay within an area. Some of the cons to this option, there could be annual quota variation. We know that on non-resident deer quotas, we often get, at our public meetings, we hear about hunter crowding and sometimes there's people that want to have a change to that quota. We could get pressure to have more conservative quotas. in parts of the state. So it might be somewhat challenging to keep that non-resident opportunity that we originally set it at. Some of the less popular areas of the state could remain unsold. And we know that some of those eastern Wyoming portions of the state that have high elk numbers, we see that with some of our other license types already, where some areas remain unsold. And again, there could be another layer of complexity to it for some people. As I mentioned earlier, non-residents will lose the opportunity to hunt general license in areas statewide. So right now, a guy that hunts in area 129 could shift and go to other areas that are listed as general. And so if there's a non-resident region, it's going to restrict them to that geographic area like it does for the mule deer non-resident regions. And again, the demand for those popular areas would likely increase. So we see some of those areas where there's non-wilderness public land areas, bags, Big Piney up towards Jackson, South Jackson, would likely see an increase in pressure on demand for those licenses. So shifting over to the history of this, in July, you guys asked a little bit about kind of how we got to where we're at. So wanted to put up a few slides here, just give you just a general reference of how we became where we're at. In the 1970s, non-resident elk licenses were issued on a first come, first served basis, beginning on the first working day of the year. And then efforts were made to randomly allocate licenses in 1974. And then in 1976, the commission appointed a task force to streamline the issuance of licenses. And that was the first of 4 efforts. Right now, with the task force's request, that'll be the 5th effort in that 40-year time frame that we've tried to take a look at this and try to come to some recommendations. In the 1980s, a cap was put on the number of non-resident hunters based on 12% of the 3-year resident license sales. So the percentage of allocation to non-residents started in that 1980 period. Finally, in 87, we went to 16, we adopted to 16%. And then the cap was based at 7,250. So they basically have, as Brian said in July, those 2 things have not been changed since then. And looking at this image, I can totally see Chief King and Chief Phipps and Jennifer Doring standing at that big barrel and flipping it around and trying to draw licenses out of it. So I think that'd be a way to go if we decide to do that again. In the 1990s and 2000, the department conducted internal license allocation reviews. I was on that 3 different times in my career. The Wyoming legislature considered license allocations. There were several legal challenges, and all of this stuff is highlighted in a white paper. I'll just show you the cover of it when we get further into the presentation, but that's available on the task force website. And if you want, we can send that back out to you. It's 100 pages of a lot of historical material. Mid 90s, you know, the commission did that, formed the task force. We met for 6 months and we couldn't reach a consensus. And then we stayed status quo with the 7,250 and the 16%. In 2014, Scott Edberg and Brian and I worked on public meetings around the state. We updated, in 2014, it was Scott Smith and a number of us around the state, and we drafted the white paper. And then in 2017, then Chief Nesvik was chief of the wildlife division at that time. We went around the state and we held meetings and tried to take a look at it again. So since the 1980s, Wyoming's elk population has increased substantially. We've gone from about 65,000 in 1980 to 115,000 in 2021. Around that same time, the bull ratios. So bull ratios are a big deal to hunters and hunt quality. And so in the 1980s, we went from 15 per 100 to 30 per 100 now. And in some places where we exceed 30 significantly. That's an average of all of the herd units around the state. Statewide harvest levels increased to record levels. And again, hunting is that primary tool that we use to manage our elk populations towards objectives. Our next agenda item, I'm going to talk a little bit about herd unit objectives, but basically within these herds, you can't have an unlimited number of animals. At some point, you're either going to reach a social carrying capacity where the landowners and others are getting frustrated with damage, or you're going to reach biological carrying capacity and those animals their production is impacted by environmental conditions. So here's what our populations have done since the 1980s. So 120,000 is the upper level here, but keep in mind that we are trying to manage to hold these elk at a certain level. Some fluctuations from year to year are influenced by weather conditions and the ability of hunters to get out in the field. Statewide elk harvest looks like this, with the total at the top there at 25,000. And then you've got bull and cow harvest. Bull is red, cow harvest is the next color there next to it. And then the calf harvest is down closer to the bottom. Statewide adult bull harvest, you can see for resident hunters is the top line. And then the non-residents is below that, around the 2,000 to 3,000 bulls per year. So 2021, the total license sales for elk with 8416 split and the 7250 quota, we ended up with a total of 14,200 basically non-resident license sales. And keep in mind that the 7250 and the 16% are just in the initial draw. And then after that, they're leftover licenses and they can pick them up. And that's how we end up with more non-residents later on in the final sales. The white paper was evaluated in 93 and then in 2014. And then when Scott Edberg and I went around the state with Brian, we ended up updating this paper. And so it's fairly updated, and it's pretty has a lot of relevant information. And we basically have baseline projections on what a non-resident region would look like around the state. And we can show you what that looks like. So this map was just a general stab at what this might look like if we went and drew geographic regions. So the green line shows around where we thought some of the regions might be at that time. And then we looked at the densities of non-residents within those areas. And so you can see on the map, it's pretty hard to read, but the grayscale, the darker grayscale was the highest densities of non-resident hunters. And so around Laramie really had an uptick in the numbers of non-residents, west of Laramie over to Baggs, the area around Du Bois, and then south of Jackson and West Green River. And what those quotas look like. So if you just took the non-resident participation from each of those areas, this is what the numbers look like. So this is the last 3-year average of people that hunted those areas. The first hunter area that they reported in the survey, and then what that looked like in 2011 and 2013. So, and you can see there was a little bit of shift. So like Laramie had more non-residents hunting. Some of the areas, actually Laramie West, saw a little bit of a decrease. Jackson saw a pretty big decrease in the number of non-residents. So if we would have set a quota around 2010 to 2014, we would have probably been a lot higher than we are now. And what's going on is a lot of non-resident general license hunters are picking other areas to go to that are a little better elk hunting. The western part of the state saw some declines. So what we would probably do is take a look at the harvest survey, the average harvest survey reporting from non-residents, and set a number that would that has been hunting in a geographic part of the state. So if we draw a big circle around the eastern part of the state, we'll take all the hunt areas within that area, and we'll look at how many non-residents currently hunt that area, and then we'll try and make a recommendation for a quota that is consistent with what's been hunting there to start with. And so our field guys are looking at that right now, trying to decide how that might look, how a regionalization would look. And the timeline and what we would like to do is come back to you. So this next slide shows you the calendar dates and what we would propose to do at each of the next commission meetings. So November, chapter 44 is already in draft on the website. And is out there for the November commission meeting. And all that's doing is clarifying some languages. So I just have that first bullet point, just informational, that you're already going to be looking at chapter 44, has nothing to do with the 7250 for what we're looking at for a public process to start talking about removing it. That only clarifies language within chapter 44. But what we'll do in November also, we'll bring to you an outline identifying non-resident general license elk regions and the quotas, what they would look like. And we'll also start our public outreach. So we're always taking public feedback, but if we start getting public feedback, we'll start keeping track of that on with regard to the 7250, particularly in November. In January at your commission meeting, we'll give you an update on what we've been hearing, what we've been seeing. And then in April, we'll also present you with an update. But during our season setting meetings leading up to the April commission meeting, we'll give you, we'll ask our publics what they think of that proposal, the draft outline of what a non-resident region layout would look like. And then in July, we'll come back to you with an update on that section 5 of chapter 44. And section 5 is the particular language that references the 7250. And that'll basically be an updated chapter 44 based on the recommendations you guys gave us previously. And then finally, in April of 2024, we'll come back with the chapter 7 regulation for the 2024 seasons. And that's where we'll have the specifics. So there's a pretty lengthy timeline, but in order to meet all the requirements and try and get some draft information out there for our public to provide comment on, we would like to move forward with having that draft outline to you at the November commission meeting. And with that ends, I'll be stand for questions.
Great job. That cleared a lot up for me right there, that session. Appreciate that. That was a great job. I think that's what I needed, was the history of it all to go from start to where we're at now. Do we have any other questions or comments or anything we'd like to? Oh,
I have a question. That was very good, Doug. Very cleared up a lot for me as well. Back on page 12, slide 12, you have the 2021 licenses with the 8416 allocation and the cap. A little more history on the 8416 split of residents, non-residents on elk. It's different for antelope, it's different for deer. Why 8416?
That was all based on that, Mr. President and Commissioner Brokaw, it was all based on those 1980s discussions on where we wanted to be. Was the 12% adequate? So there was a lot of different mindsets at that time that we needed flexibility to ensure that we were still getting adequate harvest. And we wanted to make sure that non-residents had some participation in that. And so, sheep were 75-25, moose was, the 80-20. And so we ended up settling on that 8416 at that time. And I think it was just a lot of back and forth and finally settling on a number that just kind of stayed. You got any other recollections?
What I recall from some of the discussions when we were working on the white paper was there wasn't anything written down, but through talking to some of the folks that were involved at that time, it almost appeared like the 16% was the compromise between what it had been at 12 and what antelope and deer were at 20. It was right in the middle, 16's in between those two. I say that, but that's speculation and not anything we have written down anywhere. So that's just kind of a swag.
So I perceive that as that's a swirl of hunter opportunity, still trying to meet our biological goals.
Yes,
Yeah.
it'll be a
Okay.
balance.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 17, big game herd unit objectives. Revision.
All right, thank you, Mr. President, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission. So this is our somewhat annual presentation on our management goals for herd units. And so we try to come to you if we're having herd units that we're trying to adapt or change some of the management direction. And so once we get the PowerPoint up here, I'll go through what our recommendations are for this year. And I'll provide a little background too on why we approach this the way we do. And so usually between July and September, we come before you and we talk a little bit about the management objectives, our herd units across the state and what we're trying to do. And this is no exception. This year we have basically 3 herd units that are affected by the region's decisions to try and change some of their management. Try it again, Larry. There it goes. Okay. So management by objective is basically plan management instead of reactionary. It helps us to understand where we're trying to go with the population management. The public, our department personnel, landowners, everyone understands what our direction is. And so we try to present the herd unit data to you in April. We try to present that information to our publics regarding where we want populations to move towards in their direction. And our monitoring, it basically comes in four stages. There's monitoring, and that's involves abundance surveys, composition. So our guys are out counting animals on the ground, or they're flying in a helicopter and looking at numbers of bucks, does, bulls and cows. We also look at the harvest and habitat surveys. We have objectives on where we want to be, where we want to move that population towards. And I'll talk a little bit more about those and get into the presentation. And then we use hunting seasons to get to where we want to go. And then we evaluate annually to see if we've made some direction, move that population in that direction. So across the state, we have, 40 different pronghorn herds, 37 mule deer, 5 whitetail, 35 elk herds, 10 moose, 10 bighorn sheep, 2 mountain goat herds, and 1 bison herd in the state. And every year we evaluate whether or not we're achieving those management objectives on a certain portion of those herds. And so every 5 years, all of those herds are considered to determine if we're making progress towards those goals. And some of these slides you have seen before. I just wanted to reemphasize the importance of how a population changes over time. And then you have a biological carrying capacity. So the land can only sustain so many animals, and your population fluctuates around that carrying capacity. And it's influenced by weather conditions. We saw those severe blizzards 2 years ago in eastern Wyoming. That basically pushed that carrying capacity down for that part of that year. We also have what we consider is our social carrying capacity, and that's what the public really wants to see with populations. And so a lot of our discussions on managing our big game center around these two values to determine where we can be at with a population. And so our herd units, the hunt areas are designed around the whole state, but then a herd unit is made up by several of the hunt areas, and it's a geographically area that has a discrete population. And so the bulk of those animals stay within that. And so in this example, it's just gooseberry elk herd unit. And all those animals stay pretty much within that. Less than 10% of them go outside of that herd unit boundary. And so if we have a herd unit that's quote leaky, that means they're moving all over the place. And today's recommendation is involving one of those herd units that moves all over the place. And so we're making a recommendation to change that herd unit. Each of our herd units have, again, the management objectives, and we're evaluating those every 5 years. And our field guides can elect to keep the same objective that the commission has previously approved, or we can come back to you and ask you for an adaptation to that and a approval to move that in a different direction. We also gauge public interest when we're talking through those management goals. So the current management objectives that we have for all those herd units that I talked to you, showed you the slide earlier, we have postseason population objectives, midwinter trend counts, landowner hunter satisfaction objectives, and then limited opportunity objectives for moose and bighorn sheep, because they're managed on a lot smaller number of licenses. Some of the management strategies you'll often see when we give you a herd unit update and for the season setting, there'll be a document there that shows you all the herd units in the state, and it'll tell you if it's recreational or if it's a special management. And recreational, basically, we manage to maximize the hunter opportunity that's out there. And we don't try to maintain high buck quality, high buck ratios or bull ratios with recreational management. With special management, that's where you have, we've got a few herd units around the state that we do keep higher bull ratios and higher buck ratios. The public has a lot of interest in quality over having quantity of hunting opportunity. We also have some private land strategies too. So in the eastern part of the state, we base on hunter satisfaction and landowner satisfaction. And so today, what I'd like to move into is the herd unit that we want to have permission to do some things with is the Hoback herd unit. And so this is radio collar data from the upper green and the Piney herd unit, and then Hoback in the middle. And most of those elk from those that are radio collared, either in Piney or the upper green, move into the Hoback herd. And so Hoback is a deep snow area. And so this past year, managers adjusted one of the hunt area boundaries. And what our recommendation is to absorb all the animals and the objective for Hoback into either the upper green and the Piney. And what that looks like is, we'll just talk through the upper green management unit. So we had an objective of 2,500, and we had a public review in 2012, and that was for a midwinter trend count. It's a recreational strategy. And what we're proposing to do is take the elk and I believe it's 187, and move it into the upper green management unit. And so our proposal is to go to 2,900 elk. And we did public review the last 2 years. The region actually wanted to make this change for over the last 30 years. They've been talking about how these elk that are on the Dell Creek feed ground go all over the place. They're in both herd units. And so this is a move that we've been talking about for some time. And so the objective would be adjusted upward for the upper green to accommodate those elk that come from the Dell Creek feed ground. The other herd that's affected by this proposal is the Piney elk herd, of course, down on the south end of the Wyoming range. And again, we would go from an objective of 2,400 midwinter, the population objective, to a midwinter trend count of 3,100. And these are mostly elk that are on visible winter ranges, or they're on feed grounds that are west of Big Piney. And so the managers feel that it's basically managing for the same number of animals, but we dissolved the Hoback herd, which was for 30 years. We know it's been real leaky, where all the animals there just go into the two adjoining areas. And with that, we recommend that we ask the commission to approve the absorbing the Hoback herd into the adjoining two elk herd units. And I do have Brandon Skurlock is online if we have any specific questions related to management of those two areas.
Any questions? To me, it makes sense. Geographically pretty close to the migration corridor, looks pretty close to me, but okay, I don't hear any questions. That what we're going to be doing is we're going to vote to approve revising the management objectives for the Upper Green River and Piney Elk Herd units. Do I hear a motion for that?
So moved.
It's moved by Commissioner Byrd, second
Second.
by Commissioner Brokaw. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Okay, now move on to 18, Sam Allen.
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission. I realize that Dr. Van Wyck and Dr. Allen really don't need an introduction, but they deserve one. And so I just wanted to take a minute to highlight how fortunate we are to have two just absolute wonderful state veterinarians as part of our staff. So Dr. Van Wyck is a graduate of Mississippi State College of Veterinary Medicine. After completing her DVM, she went on to pursue another graduate degree in population medicine. After finishing that degree, she completed an internship and a fellowship at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, where she focused her work on black bears. Dr. Allen has a master's degree, a DVM, and a PhD from the University of Ontario Veterinary College. Her PhD work focused on wildlife disease issues. I just bring that to your attention to highlight how fortunate the department is to have this kind of brain power and talent on our staff. It's like having two first-round draft picks to help us with these big challenges that we face in terms of taking care of Wyoming's wildlife. So with that, I will turn it over to them to give you an update on chronic wasting disease.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to speak today. As Rick mentioned, my name is Peach Van Wyck. I am the Assistant State Wildlife Veterinarian for the department, and I'm the manager of the Tom Thorne Beth Williams Wildlife Research Center. So before I get into CWD research, I would like to start with giving you a brief history and background on the Tom Thorne Beth Williams Wildlife Research Center. So for those of you who have not been out to our research facility before, we are located in Sabile Canyon, which is about 30 miles northeast of Laramie along Highway 34. It's a really beautiful spot to live and to work. So a brief history on this research facility. So back in the 1940s, the Game and Fish Department purchased about 3,000 acres of land for the establishment of a WHMA. This was primarily for mule deer wintering habitat protection. In the 1950s, some of the first buildings were built on site of this, at that time, WHMA for the purposes of wildlife research. So that is the start of the research facility. At that time, the facility was called the Sabile Wildlife Research Unit. And a lot of the disease research that was focused on during that period of time had to do with bacterial diseases such as brucellosis, leptospirosis, anaplasmosis. But as the years have progressed, things like CWD research has been adopted, of course. So our research facility was renamed the Tom Thorne Beth Williams Wildlife Research Center after the tragic death of our previous coworkers, Drs. Tom Thorne and Beth Williams. So that's why the name change occurred. However, many department employees, including myself, still simply oftentimes simply refer to our facility as Sabile. So you'll hear me say that several times throughout our presentation. Historically, more of kind of the work that's been done out at Sabile has to do with drug efficacy studies. So as you can imagine, using drugs in wild animals for the first time can be a bit challenging. And so it is ideal to be able to perform some of those drug studies in a captive or a more controlled setting before sending those drugs out in the field with our new biologists and wardens. So some of those studies were conducted out at Sabile in the past. Additionally, chemical immobilization and handling techniques and development has been conducted at Sabile, which we still do today, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. And then, of course, endangered species husbandry and propagation work with black-footed ferrets and the Wyoming toads. Okay, so now, go back one. So now we have 3 full-time staff members, including myself and 1 seasonal technician. Unfortunately, this slide is 1 day out of date. So we currently have 50 captive animals on site, including pronghorn, bighorn sheep, elk, and bobcats. Our 1 last bison is no longer with us as of yesterday. So some of the work that we conduct out at Sabile, we do an annual, Vet Services hosts an annual chemical immobilization and handling class for our new biologists and wardens. This is a really, it's a unique event, and it's pretty fun. I think at least it's a 3-day long course where we talk about drug handling, immobilization techniques for different wildlife species, how to handle those animals when they're immobilized. Usually several other department employees come in to help teach this course. Dan Thompson in particular likes to become a mountain lion, but we often have several other biologists come and demonstrate different capture and handling techniques, things like drop nets, etc. We also do 1 full day of wildlife disease training with new department staff. We teach them how to conduct field necropsies and how to collect samples to get samples sent into our wildlife health lab and the state veterinary lab. Some of you may be aware of our multi-year or our project that we've been involved with for multiple years with the Smithsonian, translocating swift fox out of the state to a reservation in Montana. This work has been going on for the past couple of years, and we were fortunate enough to have Sabile and have the facilities at Sabile to house these swift foxes in order for Dr. Allen and I to examine these animals before we approve them to be shipped out of the state. We actually used the building that was built for the black-footed ferrets in order to house these animals before we ship them. And then finally, just regular animal care and husbandry that has to occur whenever we have wild animals in captivity for the duration of their lives. So these are just some of the things that go on at Sabile on a daily basis. But what I'm really here to talk about today is kind of the meat of what we do out at Sabile and why Sabile really exists, which is the research. And first of all, I would like to say that Sabile is a very precious and unique resource to the state of Wyoming and to the department. Not every state, in fact, most states do not have a research facility like we do. And I feel very privileged to be a part of the work that we conduct at this facility. So whenever I started with the department back in May of 2020, there were a few ongoing research projects that are now under my supervision, one of which is the ongoing investigation in bacterial pathogens that contribute to bighorn sheep pneumonia. So we've had several different herds of bighorn sheep captive out at Sabile. Many of them have had, varying combinations of bacterial loads that all contribute to respiratory disease in those sheep. The samples that we've been able to collect from those sheep have greatly aided our wildlife health laboratory in the development of diagnostic techniques on the detection and isolation of bacterial pathogens in these sheep, which is really helpful in our statewide disease surveillance on pneumonia in bighorn sheep. We also have a few ongoing collaborative projects with the University of Wyoming's the Wyoming State Veterinary Laboratory, one of which includes a PhD student's project looking at the normal respiratory flora in bighorn sheep and how that normal flora, so that normal bacteria in the respiratory tract, may be altered at different stressful periods in a sheep's life, and when those sheep are actually shedding pathogenic bacteria and how that normal bacteria may be altered. So those are a couple of the projects we have ongoing with our sheep herds. And then another ongoing project that was initiated in 2017 by Dr. Mary Wood is an ongoing CWD shedding study with some of our elk. So we have a group of elk that we collect samples from twice a year, basically looking for when these animals start shedding CWD prions in their urine and their saliva and their feces. And so trying to document when they start shedding prions and when those animals succumb to CWD. So when they start showing clinical signs. So those are a couple of the projects that I adopted whenever I first started at Seville. Some of the upcoming projects that we have in the works, one of which is a nutritional study in bighorn sheep. So looking at how sheep digest energy and protein from different plants. And then the other upcoming studies all center around chronic wasting disease, one of which Dr. Allen will speak to a little bit more during her part of the presentation. But one of those is looking at the role of scavengers, particularly bobcats, and how they may play a role in the ecology of CWD. So this study we'll be utilizing our 4 captive bobcats out at Seville. And basically what we will be doing is feeding these bobcats CWD positive tissues. We will be quantifying the prions before we feed them, and then collecting fecal samples from these bobcats after they've ingested that meal and quantifying prions in their feces. The study is modeled after a study that was put out by Colorado. I believe it was the end of last calendar year, where they did something very similar, but with mountain lions. So, and again, Dr. Allen can speak a little bit more to that in a few and later on in the presentation. A couple of the other areas of research interest that we are hoping to conduct with regard to CWD, carcass disposal options for CWD positive carcasses, and environmental decontamination or mitigation methods. Okay, so some of the current projects that we have going on. This upcoming winter, the department is hoping to deploy solar-powered GPS ear tags on free-ranging mule deer. However, we were wanting to try to evaluate these ear tags in a captive setting before putting them out on free-ranging animals. So while we do not have any captive mule deer at the research facility at this time, we have these same solar-powered GPS ear tags deployed on pronghorn yearlings and 4 of our bull elk. So basically, we've just been looking at the fit of these ear tags, so making sure that the extra weight from these solar panels isn't causing any ear abnormalities. And then we've also been looking at how well these ear tags are transmitting information in relation to where these animals are located. This is information that we are, getting in real time, so as to best inform our department before, we put these out in free-ranging animals. Another project that we have going on that we started last summer is the evaluation of expandable GPS collars on pronghorn fawns. So this project really came out of a large collaborative project that the department has with the University of Wyoming, where our research collaborators are looking at, or have been looking at, collaring pronghorn does and their fawns in the Shirley Basin, and looking at if their land use patterns are changed based on wind energy development. So these collars have been going out on does, and then these expandable collars have been going out on their fawns. But these expandable GPS collars they're developed by a company called Vetronics, and they were evaluated on captive deer fawns. So these collars are supposed to expand as these animals grow up. However, we don't have any good information on how well these are expanding in our pronghorn fawns. So we decided that since we have the ability to have pronghorn fawns in captivity out at Seville, that we could provide that information. So we've both been looking at the fit and the expansion of these collars on these fawns as they grow up. And then we've also been trying to evaluate if the presence of these collars causes any undue stress on these fawns. So we've taken in fawns and either collared them or left them uncollared, and taken different measurements and observations on both groups. And then we've also, so we started that project last summer and we've continued it this summer in order to try to expand our sample size. One objective way we're trying to look at stress in these animals is collecting fecal samples from them and having their cortisol levels evaluated. So a higher cortisol level should equate to a higher stress level. And interestingly, with the 2 fawns that we had enrolled in this study last year, oh, I do have a clicker, or I have a laser. So the fawn that is the cortisol levels that are outlined in that orange line graph, that was actually the fawn that had a collar on versus the one that is outlined in the green line graph was the fawn without the collar. So these were just 2 animals, so we can't draw grand conclusions, but this initial information really made us want to conduct this study again this year and expand our sample size and really look at whether or not these collars are causing stress on these fawns. So it's been really interesting to watch these collars expand in real time and watch these threads break down and as they're supposed to as these fawns are growing up. I do have a video here, but we don't have to play it. You can if you want to. It's really just candy. It's it's just showing a pronghorn fawn that we currently have in care running up for her bottle feeding session. It also might embarrassingly have some audio of me talking to her. It won't. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Let's play it.
It might not work. We might not have audio.
Not playing it.
That's okay. But this has been a really interesting project to be involved with. We've had a lot of conversations with the biologists that work for Vetronics in the development of these different collars for species. And after putting these collars on fawns last summer, we were able to provide them with a lot of feedback and they provided us with a lot of feedback and helped us kind of refine our study design for the fawns that we have currently in care. So this is valuable not only for our department, but for any other state agency that is collaring pronghorn fawns with these types of collars. Okay. And then lastly, the project that I would like to talk with y'all about, and perhaps the one that you might be most interested in, is a vaccine trial for or using a novel CWD vaccine. So looking at immune response after some of our captive elk were vaccinated with this new vaccine. So this is a collaborative project with the University of Alberta. So researchers out of the Center for Prions and Protein Folding Diseases. This group, I believe we contacted or we're in contact with this group a couple years ago, actually. So prion diseases are notoriously difficult to vaccinate for. One, it is difficult to stimulate the immune response to a misfolded or an infectious prion. And then 2, the actual prevention of prion diseases seems to be very difficult to accomplish. So our researchers were trying to tackle some of those challenges by creating a different type of vaccine based off of the infectious prion structure. So what they were doing, this figure is just really trying to show the image on the far left is what a healthy or normal prion would look like versus the image in the middle is what a misfolded or an infectious prion may look like. And the highlighted portions of green and blue highlight surface proteins that our collaborators were able to isolate. As you can tell, they're much more accessible and visible in the infectious or the misfolded version of a prion versus the healthy or the normal prion. So they were able to isolate these surface proteins, amplify them, and use those as a carrier for the vaccine. So they base the vaccine off of the prion structure itself in order to elicit an immune response. Now, our collaborators, being at the University of Alberta, they had a captive or a laboratory mouse colony. They were able to vaccinate these mice with this vaccine, and they were able to not only show that these mice elicited an immune response, but that the ones that were vaccinated actually lived 250% longer than the ones that were unvaccinated, or
before they started showing signs of prion diseases. So that was kind of the end of the road for them because our collaborators didn't have anything larger than mice within their university setting. So that's where we were able to kind of step in. So what we did is last fall, we took a group of 12 elk that were already housed at Seville. We divided that group of 12 into 3 different groups of 4 elk. So one group of 4 elk was administered a control vaccine, one was administered a low dose vaccine, and then one was administered a higher dose of that vaccine. All these elk, we collected blood from them before we vaccinated them, and then we administered the vaccine along with 3 boosters, 3 weeks apart. We collected blood from them at each of those time periods, and then we collected a final sample of blood 3 weeks after their last booster was administered. We saved all those samples and then we shipped them all up to Alberta for analyses. And that is, we'll get to that. Okay, that is what these, the last 2 graphics that you have in this presentation are trying to show as far as our results go. So basically, the way to think about this graph is a reaction or a vaccine titer check. So what this graph is showing is so we have on the x-axis all 12 of these elk. The first 4 were the ones that were given a control. The second 4 were the ones that were given a low dose of the vaccine. And then the third group were the ones given a higher dose of that vaccine. So the blue columns that are showing up first, that was their blood samples that were analyzed for presence of this vaccine or presence of an immune response before they were given either the control or the vaccine. So as you can tell, they're all of those blue bars on all 12 of those elk are relatively at the same level. So no detection of immune response, which makes sense because they had not yet been given the vaccine. After vaccination, either with a control, so not a vaccine, or the low dose or the high dose, the elk that were administered a lower dose or a higher dose of the vaccine, they did elicit an immune response. Now, it looks like all 8 of these elk, visually, it looks like everybody mounted some sort of immune response. However, mathematically, this first elk in this lower dose group, our collaborators weren't super happy with that response. So we're not counting that one as having mounted any sort of immune response. But the 7 out of the 8 elk that were vaccinated seemed to mount some sort of immune response when compared to the control group. To clarify, we don't have any idea if the immune response that was elicited equals any sort of protection, right? So we don't know if even this very last elk on this graph with this very high immune response, we don't know if that means that that elk would be protected from either developing CWD or becoming infected with CWD, shedding the prions, et cetera. What we were able to show with the work that we were able to do just this past fall was that these animals, at least 7 out of the 8 of them, we could say that some sort of immune response was elicited. So this is kind of the first step in a vaccine trial. However, our collaborators did take this a step further. So they were able to show that elk that were given a vaccine, so the blood that was collected from them after they were vaccinated, in 6 out of the 8 elk that were given either the low dose or the higher dose of vaccine, their blood recognized, or that their blood kind of recognized when they were exposed to CWD prions in a laboratory setting. We don't necessarily know how this would equate to if they were to come across CWD in a natural setting, but our collaborators were pleased with this outcome. So this is, again, very first steps. So kind of the next steps for this particular study, we collected blood samples from these elk back in late spring, and then we'll do so again this fall. Again, kind of looking for this same titer response. So how long are these animals holding an immune response? We also, it'd be nice as far as a modification or a modified vaccination schedule. As I outlined to y'all earlier, these elk were given a vaccine and then 3 boosters 3 weeks apart. So looking at modifying that vaccination schedule, and then a conversation that we're currently having with these same collaborators is looking at the delivery method of this vaccine. So the vaccine that we administered these animals was via intramuscular injection. So our collaborators are trying to look at whether or not this vaccine could be given either orally or nasally. So that is kind of the update I have on that particular project, as well as everything else we have going on at the research facility. Do any of you have any questions for me at this time?
I don't know if I do or don't.
Where do we begin?
Do we? Nobody wants to.
Mr. President. What's the status of CWD in the environmentally? Catching it from the environment, whatever. We've heard stories that Sabile is infected with CWD, and just putting in some fresh, clean critters there within a short amount of time they're infected. Is there any truth to that? And just expound on that maybe.
Thank you for the question. So, and I believe Commissioner Dubey, you were asking if animals that are clean and they're just put out at Sabile, then if they do contract CWD, if they become infected,
Yes.
is that your question? So having only been there for a couple years, I will say yes. Because we don't, the elk that we have on site right now, even in my, short duration with the department and out at Sabile, we have had elk that have succumbed to CWD, and we haven't inoculated anybody with CWD. There hasn't been interaction between them and free-ranging elk or deer in that area that we know of. And they have succumbed to it. So, and some of the diagnostic methods, so RT-Quick that Dr. Allen will be speaking about a little bit later, there's some difficulty in actually testing environmental samples for the presence of prions, though what we know about our animals currently and ones that have been there long before I started, those animals have succumbed to CWD just having been out at the research facility. And that is likely just due to the number of CWD positive cervids we've had on site that have shed prions in their feces and in their urine that just kind of hangs out in the environment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just when we were doing all these surveys and public meetings, Dr. Wood, one of the things that scared me the most was that how it affects the environment,
Right.
how they can catch them there, how long it lasts there. Those
Right.
types of things seem to be kind of scary stuff. So
I agree.
Is there any kind of idea of how long the prions stay in the soil? Is there?
So President Roberts, it depends on the soil type. It can also depend on other climatic or environmental variables. I'm not sure about the exact soil type that we have, particularly out at the facility, but other prion diseases, particularly scrapie, some of the work that's been done on scrapie, the prion disease of sheep, have suggested that prions can survive for decades in the environment, given the right type of soil and clay type. More than 16 years.
Problem.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. It'll take us a while to digest it all, but
Yeah.
now we'll really get another dose of.
Yeah, get ready. Here we go. President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, Commission, happy Wednesday. Let's get excited and then get bored. So I am here today to follow up on what we started to discuss in the spring, mainly focusing on RT-Quick and really focusing on what the department is trying to do to really be leaders in this field. I know sometimes we're talked about as control is the word that's been used, but this is an area where we're actually really in the forefront of. And so I'm excited to present 3 projects that we're working on with collaborators, and then just a little reminder of what RT-Quick is.
So in the spring, and I'm gonna do this. Will it do this? No, I'm gonna squat a little bit. I'm sorry. We talked about Ferreira et al. And so this was the paper that looked at utilizing this molecular technique, RT-Quick, and looking at ear punches. So we learned that there are certain areas of the ear which are preferable than others, but this could potentially be a very good tool or additional sample type for antemortem CWD testing. And as a reminder of what RT-Quick is, we're talking about reverse transcription, quaking-induced conversion. I'm going to keep saying RT-Quick because that's a lot faster and easier for me. But just as an idea of what it is, we're looking at a molecular technique that amplifies prion material. So we take our sample, be it, let's say ear. We put that on kind of a base, which is that blue material down there. That base is seeded with prion-like material. So that's the thing that's going to identify, do we have prions in there or not? So if we don't have that, we can't start the whole process at all. If we have a positive sample, we kind of mix that up. We put that on a plate that gets shaken. Sometimes the simplest answers, right, to science. We're going to shake this plate so everything breaks up a little bit. And then if we do have a positive, it's going to be amplified. Why do we want amplification? So that we can see it. So once it gets amplified, a computer printout shows us that, yes, here's a beautiful line graph. You have a CWD positive animal. If it is a negative, you're not going to see that amplification and you're not going to see that nice line graph. Why do we even care about RT-Quick? Which is a really good question. For one thing, it's highly sensitive. Basically, that means we can pick up CWD positive animals even at lower ends of disease spectrum. So animals that might be newly acquired CWD, ones in that early stage disease, this is more likely to pick those up. Can be faster in some cases if we're using very specific tissues that we use all the time, like our retropharyngeal lymph nodes or our OBEX. This can take about 24 hours to run, which is ideal. And then we can look at different tissues. So this is providing us that flexibility. Certain individuals have looked at feces. A study has looked at blood, muscle. But again, it really kind of increases the number of tools we have in our toolbox and helps us in the field maybe collect some different samples than what we would typically take. What are the challenges though? It does take time to validate these extra tissue types. It's not just overnight, we're just going to do this. Protein, that base that I was talking about can be really expensive to purchase. And if we don't want to purchase it, it can be tricky to make. You need 18 million degrees to do this. This is something we can purchase again, but it is expensive. You can use feces, ear, and urine. However, this takes more time and needs a little more work to kind of get there. There are things called inhibitors in there, and that kind of stops us from our ability to see that amplification. And then we need dedicated lab space and equipment. That can be expensive, and we need specialized staff, and that can be tricky to find. So where is the department going with RT-Quick? And now this is not department wide. There are a ton of other projects that are ongoing in the department, and I'm really just focusing in on RT-Quick specifically. One of the other examples in our kind of group right now, what's the best tissue to take for dead elk? Can we use tonsils? That's something else that's ongoing. But again, RT-Quick specific. And we're really going to look at 3 projects to date. One of them is a prion shedding dynamic study using a retrospective group of tissues that we have saved up. That's in collaboration with all those fancy people there. And this project was funded for over $200,000, and it's ongoing from now until 2025. We are developing antemortem RT-Quick diagnostics, mainly looking at the ear punch. So we want to know, can we use it here in the state of Wyoming? So again, all our fancy collaborators on there. And this project was also funded for around $100,000. This is looking to start in 2023. And then we're looking, can we use RT-Quick to look at the seeding activity, so those prions, in the feces of bobcats that have consumed CWD positive tissue. This was also funded just recently, and the thought is to have this start now and continue on into 2023. So let's start with project 1. So what are our objectives here? Well, one, can we use saved samples that we have had for a number of years? And now I'm talking samples that go back to Dr. Beth Williams. For those that know Dr. Beth Williams, she was ahead of her time, and she knew that someday we would have molecular techniques that could look at CWD. So in preparation for that, her and some other collaborators looked at white-tailed deer, mule deer, and elk. They infected them with a known amount of CWD and then collected samples over a period of time. Now, these animals, it was all done in captivity, but it is one of the only sample sets like this that exists in CWD research, and it has been sitting in a freezer for many, many years. So our hope is to use those because, again, we know when they were infected and how much and the species, and we know all the sample types. And can we use those to see when these animals started shedding? How much are they shedding? Can we use the different sample types with RT-Quick to identify what the best tissue is to use? Are there differences across different species, different sexes? So where are we right now? Basically, we are at inventory. I know that sounds very sad. However, we're talking samples that have been kept in freezers for about 20 years. So one of the first things was really to understand what we had. This table right here shows you the number of samples that we have and the number of individuals that were used in the study. This is a very big sample size. 66 in a wild animal study is actually pretty incredible, considering we normally have 3 or maybe 10 if we're lucky. So all of that has been inventoried. We've set up a database for our samples to start looking at them. And we have a master's student right now looking at optimizing the fecal samples. So we decided to start with the fecal samples. We thought, you know, this would be an easy one in the field to collect down the road. So that's where we've began. Preliminary results indicate high sensitivity when we sample from animals in the lower end of their kind of CWD infection. So we're talking mid to terminal animals and not right at the start yet. We're trying to optimize that. Is there a way to make this more sensitive for some of our early stage diseased animals? And we also did a pilot to see, can we take out some extra steps? So it sounds really fast and easy. You put the tissue in with the, media, shake it, and we're done, right? That's it. There are extra steps in there. And we're seeing if we can simplify this to shorten the time period needed. What are our next steps? It's all about feces right now, which is really fun. As a vet, that's all you ever talk about. So, poop is life. We're gonna proceed with some of our additional studies because we really want to see when can we pick it up, how long can we pick it up for in this disease cycle, and how much. We're going to continue comparing the fecal shedding across these different individuals to see if there's some difference in there. And we really want to see what our limitations are on testing feces, because the thought would be long-term, can we use this in live caught free ranging cervids, right? We want to bring this to the field at some point. And then we've also started looking at saliva as kind of an alternate. Can we amplify that, which has been slightly tricky. So I always like to throw in just a why slide, because I always have to think about why are we doing this a bit. Why really are we doing it though? It's incredibly important to know when animals start shedding CWD, especially what stage of disease, which animals should we keep on the landscape, which ones should we remove, and at what levels, and does it vary between species? They are all slightly different. I mean, it would be a thing that they could all shed at different amounts and at different times. So that's really valuable information to have. This is a valuable data set that has been sitting there. No one has been using it. And so it's nice to know that when an animal is infected to really understand that process. And then antemortem testing. This is really one of the main reasons why we do this, right? We want to bring something that we can use in the field to help us identify animals earlier. All right, number 2, we're all still with us. Yeah, we're doing it. You guys are great, look at that. Okay, so this is using RT-Quick on traditional, so lymph tissue, but looking at non-traditional tissue types as well. And when I mean non-traditional, I mean the ear punches. We want to see if we can maximize sensitivity, and can we use it in Wyoming? Is this a tool that we can get up and running and validated for the use here? So we have collected more than 100 mule deer ears. And this has been in combination with hunter harvested samples for CWD testing. So we do have an idea from our traditional lymphoid types if we are positive or not. We have started to look at these ears, and it has been indicated that, again, for deer in kind of that mid to terminal stage of CWD, that we can get this to work. So our issue still right now is those really early diseased animals, but we are getting this to work on mid to late diseased animals. And then we also determined where the biopsy site should be. It's a little painful for the deer to pull right on that nerve, right? If they're alive, there's a lot of blood in there. So we really wanted to see how far off the nerve do we have to go to still get a positive. And the nice thing here is we're finding that it still works very well, slightly off of that area. So what are our next steps? We're going to keep looking at this to optimize it. And again, we really want to focus on those earlier stages. We know we can get this to work later, but are we missing, a ton of animals because we can't pick them up in earlier stages? We're going to keep collecting punch biopsy ears. And the hope is at some point to use this on captures that are upcoming. So live deers to help validate it even further. And again, our why, I think it's clear, but we're really, again, trying to diversify what samples we can take, where can we have success in the field, and really identifying those animals as soon as we possibly can. And then finally, and this is, Peach did an excellent job introducing it, so I probably don't have to go too much into it, but this is using RT-Quick to detect prions in bobcat feces. So looking at how much are we really left with at the end of the day. So our objectives here, again, looking for that prion activity, how much is there before and after, and then how long is it left? So where are we right now? Well, right now we have some preliminary results that we can use bobcat feces that has been spiked with CWD material. So that's the first step, right? Can we even do this? And it seems like we can. It looks like inhibitors in carnivore scat is not as bad as we were previously told. So we've kind of managed that problem there. And we've had our protocol submitted to our internal animal care and use committee that was recently approved. So we kind of green light to go on with this project. So what are our next steps? Well, we're going to begin experimenting with dyed ground meat. Fun fact, we have to dye the meat so that we can see when they're pooping out our CWD material. So we just want to make sure the bobcats will eat it. We have to assess the internal transit time for bobcats. There's no good research out there that says when you eat something as a bobcat, you will be done in 24 hours. So we just need to make sure we understand that process. And then finally, we want to use RT-Quick to look at the duration and then the magnitude of prion persistence before and after. And why? Well, Peach really alluded to this, but there was a recent study that came out of Colorado looking at mountain lions, and they found that prion load were reduced by 96% following consumption of infected CWD material. So we just want to see on maybe a lower scaled carnivore, more of a scavenger, if that holds true. Additionally, we want to understand the potential role that our consumers may play in CWD. So that's kind of our quick run through of RT-Quick right now with the department and others. Do we have any questions?
Do you have a test for Commissioner Jolovich to see if he retained all of this here? Let's see.
I do. I can write one up. I'll send it your way. Just keep an eye on the email.
You quizzing, but fascinating stuff. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's complex, but fascinating.
We're getting there.
Yeah,
One day at
I
a
appreciate it. It's
Mr.
quite
President. So on the, back to the prions in mountain lions. So whatever they consumed, 100% of it was infected. When they were done with it, so to speak, 96% of that was gone.
Yes,
So only 4% of CWD was left.
correct.
So we don't have mountain lions in captivity, so that's why we're using bobcats, correct?
Sorry, President Roberts, Commissioner Doobie, there's a couple of reasons. One, yes, we have bobcats, and so it was an ideal opportunity. The other thought process too, though, is mountain lions would be known to kind of take some of these animals out themselves, right? You know, they're getting a full carcass, they're caching them in some cases, they're potentially eating different parts of the carcass. Bobcats come at it in a different way, right? They're more scavengers, they get kind of what's left over. And unless you're a very small deer, you know, they don't tend to take them out themselves on the landscape. So it's really just another part of this ecological process. How do they fit in as well? Are they similar that way? And how would it work in that stead? Did that help?
So Mr. President, so you're collaborating with Ontario?
No, we're
Or just-
collaborating. Sorry. go
Not
ahead.
you, but I mean, I'm just your whole process. Peaches, didn't you say you were collaborating with the University of Ontario or
Alberta.
Alberta? Okay.
Yes.
Who else are you collaborating with?
Yeah, so the vaccine program is, sorry again, Roberts, Commissioner Doobie. The vaccine work is with the University of Alberta. These three projects here, there's varying people, but mainly the Wyoming State Veterinary Lab. We have researchers there that we're working with. For the long-term kind of retrospective, looking at sample study, we're also collaborating with Colorado. So I don't know if you've heard of Mike Miller and Lisa Wolf. So we're working with them there. For the ears, we're working with USGS. So Dr. Paul Cross is part of it. And so they kind of all run the gamut in all of those different groups there. Does that answer?
Yeah, I was just curious as to the number of other entities across the United States that are pursuing this research.
Oh, and as far as others pursuing research outside of us, Minnesota and Wisconsin have a group. I believe Colorado with USDA APHIS is also trying to do similar stuff. Montana with their Rocky Mountain Wildlife Research Group up there is also looking at it as well. So there's a few different groups working at it, but you know, we're collaborating with a couple of them here and
So
there.
how is the coordination?
It is.
Is there any?
There is coordination mainly for the, again, retrospective one. There's a lot of coordination with Colorado, with WSVL and ourselves. I'm on each of these grants as a co-PI and at least a collaborator. So we do have a pretty tight ship in some of these cases as where we're going and what Wyoming can contribute and get from it. Yeah, it's pretty good so far. The groups are small enough that I think we're communicating effectively, but not so small that we don't have a bunch of different ideas coming in, which I think is important. And the students themselves working on these projects are based at the Wyoming State Veterinary Lab. So they're here in Wyoming.
I have a question for the director. There was supposed to be a lot of federal money for CWD research. Is that trickling down our way or is it?
Yeah, it's still there, but it hasn't been, there was a directive as part of that bill when it passed that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service develop a task force that would determine future need as well as how the money would be disseminated. And they haven't even convened the task force yet. So it's still in the doldrums of the federal government. I do think though, there's been discussions in some of the more recent legislation that's passed about, and I do know there were some allocations to wildlife disease. So I think it's coming. It's just not here yet.
President Roberts, Commissioner Doobie, for our Bobcat study, we did manage to get APHIS funding. So that's something federally that we were able to get. So that's part of another group of funding coming from the federal government. So we were successful in that regard.
How many states deal with this as far as the chronic wasting disease? How many states do they figure have it a problem?
So the last I saw, and it changes every day, we're at about 29, but that's captive and wild combined. So you have to piece that out, and 4 provinces. And on top of that, we're talking Scandinavian countries like Norway and South Korea also deals with CWD.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted Peach and Sam to come today was that, you know, we've talked that the the grand solution is going to require a significant amount of money and a long period of time and something much bigger than any one entity to be able to find a solution to the problem. But at the end of the day, you know, we can't use that as a reason to do nothing. And we're doing something. We have experts, we have a great facility, we have a lot of history with working with this disease in Wyoming. And so it's important that we continue to work on this and not throw our hands in the air. And there, as you can see, Peach and Sam have not done that.
I guess I'll ask Commissioner Brokaw's question. Is there anything else the commission can do to help?
President Roberts, Commissioner Dewey, I guess Commissioner Brokaw, at some point I will be coming to ask for money. So get ready for that.
That's the guy right there.
Very good.
Any other questions? Oh, Mr.
So
Sullivan, good.
out of a mountain lion, 94% of it's gone. This is 94% of how many? Do you count those? Is there a number?
I don't have the exact paper, and I wish I had a memory that was really effective.
Well, my point is, so it starts with 100% in the mountain lion and only 94% comes out. Is that 20? Is that 20 million? And what I'm getting at is, if it's just a few, there's probably not much of a chance of it spreading. But if that number is a big number, even though it's only 6%, does it have a huge chance of being able to spread?
President Roberts, Commissioner Dolovich. So they did start with a certain amount, and I wish I could tell you right now how much that was. I know for our study, we're looking at 250 grams of kind of what we consider normal, CWD meat, and then 25 grams of what we considered infected CW meat. The issue sometimes lies, right, which is what is a protein, right? Is it 5 proteins? Is it 6 proteins? And that's kind of where the tricky part is. RT Quick allows us to amplify it, right, and give us an idea. Right. So if it amplifies quickly, we know there's a lot in there. If it amplifies really slowly or never does, right, we know that there's very little. In this case, they did take samples from heavily infected animals. So as far as kind of the scale goes, these animals were loaded with CWD prions. I don't know if that helps you kind of quantify, but it's not, the early stage ones. And so they give you a number, right? Like 100%, and we're down to this much at the end, because it's easier for us to, even like myself, to understand kind of where we're at. But from that material, from heavily infected animals, after their certain period of time, they were able to show that they were down to kind of 94 to 96% left.
Thank you.
I don't know if that helps. But.
Yep.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Very nice.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Rick, for that intro. It's probably the nicest one I've ever gotten. So
yeah, very good. That's because he didn't want for you guys to ask him questions.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go to the next presenter. Sarah, are you gonna? You almost made the cut yesterday, and look, you got bumped clear back to the next day and all almost through the day. Close.
The anticipation has been building then.
Yeah.
President Roberts, commissioners, I'm super excited to come and talk about our email communications program today. This is one of the functions within the communications, education, and public relations work unit. So the program is based in communications, but receive a lot of support from and collaboration from our programming department and also our licensing department in order to make this work possible. We couldn't do the volume or the type of emailing to the public that we do without the collaboration of those two work units. Been using email communication since 2013, but our program launched more robustly in 2015. So our program is made up of a lot of different types of email messages. We email mass communications like press releases. We send newsletters to the public. We also do emailing on customer service-based messages, like if your license is going to expire, and other reminders for hunters and anglers. We also email draw results. Just started doing that this last year. So Game and Fish is a big fan of using email communications, and there's a couple of reasons why. One of those is it's a really direct form of communication. We can target exactly who we want to talk to by using the support of IT to curate lists based on our messages. It's really customizable too. We can include people's names and exactly the license that we might be talking to them about in the email, so there's no confusion. And it's really an affordable way to communicate. With our state contract, it costs us no dollars every time we send an email. So we're really, really utilizing the resources that we have to be accountable to sportsmen's dollars. And the other piece, which is the most important to me, is that it's trackable. We can see a lot of data that shows how effective our communications are and continue to improve every message based on what we learn about how people interact with the emails and the messages that they want to receive. So I have some numbers to present to you to show how effective email can be. We have an average 45% open rate on our messages. We have an average of 3.7% click rate, and we have a less than 1% unsubscribe rate. These metrics are important because we know people are opening our messages, we know people are clicking on them, and we know that no one's unsubscribing from them because they highly value the information that's arriving in their email inbox. To give you a little bit of context to industry averages for government, that we're almost double the open rate of our industry average. That compares to 28.7%. Our click rate is higher than the average too by almost a full percent, and our unsubscribe rate is a lot lower than the industry average. So overall, that means we're doing much better than most people are with email communications. And we managed to talk to a lot of people using email because of the type of tool it is and how effective it is. To give you an overview of just our main email newsletters, our hunting update, which goes to all types of hunters in our licensing system, whether it be elk hunters to small game hunters and people who said they're interested in hunting in Wyoming. It's over 500,000 folks. Our fishing update, 206,000. Our wildlife update is 12,000, and those are folks who have self-identified as people who want to receive updates about just our wildlife and wildlife viewing and engaging in wildlife overall. And then we have our Inspire Kid update, which are kids, families, and educators who want to learn more about all the fun activities and work that we're doing in the state to inspire kids. So we're constantly trying to improve our program and be more effective and come up with new ways that we can leverage email to communicate to our public and also give them value-rich emails like with draw results. Draw results was a new project that we took on, and we in 2022 have already emailed over 177,000 people their draw results directly to their email. That was an enhancement that we were able to offer to help take the load off our website, as well as our call center, to make sure that people were just getting their draw results easily. All they want to know is to find out if they drew or not. And so with the help of IT and licensing, we came up with some really cool new innovative ways to do that, to make sure everyone can get their draw results fast and easy from now on. Those draw results have remarkably high engagement, with 68% of people checking those emails for their draw results. So that's an incredible service that we're able to provide to the public. And so where we're looking to go next is obviously more growth. We want to continue to grow our program and be a resource to the public. We're looking to be more customer service minded and constantly thinking about messages and ways that we can keep the public engaged, not only with information, but also things like draw results and personalized information. Something that we do every year, as an example, is reminding people that their preference point balance might be expiring soon, since they do have to purchase points every 2 years. We use email as a way to remind folks, like, your points might expire, please renew them. A message like that also helps save the department money because we follow up with letters, printed letters to folks. So if we can get them to buy their preference points over email first, it reduces our mail costs when it comes to following up with a printed letter like that. We're also trying to get more specific, targeting certain groups to make sure that they're getting the information that they want and need at the time they want and need it. And that goes through defining the audience. An example of that is we've started to remind folks that their annual fishing licenses are expiring in the month that they're expiring, so they can keep them engaged in fishing and keep them their licenses valid. And we'll always continue our innovation to make our emails better, look better, work better, and serve the public better. And so I really encourage everyone to use their correct email address when they apply for a license. We have our licensing portal now that requires people to use an email address to log in. Those are the email addresses that we use to communicate with folks and send those value-rich messages like draw results. So when we don't have accurate email addresses, that's where our messaging falls short and where people miss out on some of the services that we're trying to expand and offer. And so everyone should use their correct email address, a valid email address to apply. And the great thing about the emails is they're protected. We can't provide email addresses outside of Game and Fish to any other state entity or through a public information request. So they stay safe and secure with Game and Fish. And that's everything. I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Fascinating. Amazing how things have changed quickly.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. McBarnes, this will be the last item or agenda item anyway.
President Roberts, Director Nesbitt, members of the commission, always an honor to be here. Chris McBarnes, President of the Wildlife Fund. I'll try to help bookend this meeting well and help you finish off what has been a very strong 2 days here for the wildlife of Wyoming. It was a nice commute for me this morning down French Creek. It's a lot better than driving to Evanston, no offense. The Wildlife Fund is stationed here in Johnson County, Buffalo, right out here on Main Street. And I'm very proud to call Buffalo home, very proud of our community. Want to start by saluting our private landowners. I thought last night was just a tremendous celebration of people across the state who are going above and beyond for wildlife. I want to thank the department for putting that event on. We just had just a very small part in it. And I always love hearing Director Nesbitt MC this event on an annual basis. I hope he's the director for many, many years to come. But I think if he's not, maybe Jimmy Fallon will retire and Director Nesbitt can hop into his spot. But you do a fine job, and having the governor there last night, I think really shows how our top leader in the state values wildlife and the people who take care of it. This past Monday, we had the honor of having a Wildlife Fund board meeting here in Johnson County in Buffalo. All of our board members were in attendance. We take this responsibility very seriously of stewarding the Wildlife Fund, which acts as the nonprofit arm of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission and Department. We do have a few board members in presence today. We have our chairman, Mark Wilson, who is here in Buffalo, our vice chairman, Bruce Shackelford, our secretary, Penelope Maldonado, and of course, Commissioner Doobie and Director Nesbitt are there as well. We had close to an 8-hour meeting, strategize for the future, debrief this year, and a lot of exciting things are happening with the Wildlife Fund. And most importantly, we've really built a team culture, a family culture. We're learning from one another and pushing each other to become better on an annual basis. And so I want to salute them. Here recently, we just released $10,000 through our micro grants program to help support combating and holding the line against invasive annual grasses across the state. Helping out Afton elk collaring research and also helping with bear conflict mitigation in Park County. So that micro grant process is growing. We're handing out more and more money on a quarterly basis, which is wonderful. Right now, we have 31 students ranging from Nevada all the way up to Alaska and across the West that are at the Whiskey Mountain Conservation Camp in Du Bois, participating in our Western Conservation Leadership Development Program. So not only are we helping the younger kiddos through the Directors Inspire a Kid initiative, but we're helping the bigger kiddos too. Nish and Ian Tater are both taking part in this adaptive leadership course that's happening this week in Wyoming. The Kansas City Leadership Institute, amongst professors from the likes of Harvard University, are helping conduct this course, and it's really giving leaders within federal and state wildlife agencies, along with tribal partners. We're very proud we have a member of the Blackfeet Nation that's taking part in WCLDP this year, and NGOs and private landowners. It's helping them take the next steps in their adaptive leadership skill set to help navigate the complex issues that Western conservation is providing us today. So we're proud of that. We've collected close to $215,000 in tuition payments. It is $8,500 to attend this course. So it's a great program that the Wildlife Fund is a part of. We're proud to be smack dab in the middle of it. And I think it just goes to show how the state of Wyoming really is in the middle of it all when it comes to conservation and helping wildlife and people grow that are helping us face those wildlife challenges. Wildlife tourism for tomorrow. You've all heard us talk about this. You remember the tour that we went on in Jackson with Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures. Hard to believe that was 2 years ago, Commissioner Byrd. It seems like 20. A lot's happened since then. But we've got some things we need to tweak with the program, Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow. So we've engaged with Flittner Strategies, a preferred marketing agency and communications agency out of Jackson, to do a little bit of a rebrand with Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow. I think we've missed the mark with linking that program with the Wildlife Fund. It is a program underneath the umbrella of the fund. It's not a separate 501c3. It's not a separate entity. And there's been some confusion revolving around that. So we just need to take a step back, go through a professional process. Our board has approved this, and I think we'll come out of this process much stronger. So we're looking to create a better link to the fund, number one, and to tell folks that through this program, we're not promoting tourism. We know we have quite enough tourism in the state of Wyoming. And so through the program, we're not promoting tourism, rather we're harnessing the tourism sector of this economy of the state of Wyoming to produce more resources to help fund critical wildlife initiatives. So that's something else we're working on. I will mention we have $70,000 through that program that's ready to hit the ground for wildlife projects that align with Game and Fish vision and mission. And we'll more than likely be making those announcements for the commission in Rock Springs in November. Here 2 months ago, I had the pleasure with Commissioner Doobie and our chairman, Mark Wilson, of traveling to Springfield, Missouri to further strengthen our relationship with Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Had a very productive set of meetings with Senior Director of Conservation, Bob Zemer. And also we had the pleasure of meeting the man, the myth, the legend, Johnny Morris. Johnny walks up and he had his muck boots on and had just been walking through a big sinkhole of one of his properties, and just an incredible man that is a true visionary when it comes to conservation. And thanks to Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, and now that I-25, those bids have been accepted, we'll be sending a check for $223,000 down to Cheyenne to help implement I-25. And our board approved the next steps with Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's to go back and make a significant ask and hopefully generate partnership around the Kimmer Highway 189 crossing. And I'm very hopeful that that message will resonate with them. But you know, getting outside of Wyoming every now and then and reaching across the aisle and building relationships with these folks, I think are going to pay big dividends moving into the future. And they appreciate what the Wildlife Fund is doing for Wyoming. The rest of my year will be focused on sustainability efforts for the future of the Wildlife Fund. That's why you folks hired me, was to build a brand, get things done, but ultimately create a model that does not rely on government assistance. And so we have a story to tell now. We have success. We have metrics to share. We have lives that have been impacted. So now we go out and we sell that, and we build a model that carries this fund into the future that's going to last well beyond me and well beyond that next person. And so as I think about it, we have some great loaves of bread baking in the oven right now around sustainability. And we hope before the end of the year, we'll be able to make some big announcements to you folks and deliver on that commitment that the fund made to this commission for your incredible investment in us over these past 3 years. So to end my presentation today, I do have a 10-minute video I'd like to share with you. We collaborated with the Muley Fanatic Foundation, the Hobbs School, and the photo and video team of Max Benz to create a compelling story that we're going to have on Facebook. We're going to share out through email that connects the importance of migration routes with transportation projects. Commission made an amazing investment yesterday in Kimmerer. Thank you for doing that. And this is the story of Mule Deer F-14 and further solidifies why we need to stay focused on transportation crossing projects in the state.
Mule deer are often considered the icon of the West. It's this animal that dominates Western habitats basically from the plains to the sagebrush steppe to the high alpine mountains, and they can exist across that entire gradient. And also when you think about the state of Wyoming in particular, are very important animal to Wyoming. Mule deer are an animal that live in a world that has been changing right under their feet. And while they are flexible to some degree and respond to their world, they're certainly not adjusting and changing the way in which the world around them is changing. And so through this work, what we've been trying to do is help unveil and uncover some of those answers as to why mule deer are struggling in their current world. Our goal is to tell each animal's story. I think at the surface level, as people think about deer or a mule deer, they're just this common animal that we see here and there out in the sagebrush or up in the high mountains. During my master's degree back in South Dakota, I worked with captive deer and then did various experiments, feeding trials, other things with them. Working with those deer during that period of time, I came to appreciate that much like people, every deer, every animal is unique. Once an animal has become an adult and established a migratory route, mule deer remain incredibly faithful to that route. We started the Wyoming Range Mule Deer Project back in 2013, and it's been kind of the cornerstone of some of our work to better understand the ecology of mule deer. 221. Through that work, because of its long-term nature, we've had the capacity to follow animals for a long period of time. And so back in spring of 2015, I was fortunate enough to be part of capturing and collaring F-14 on the day that she was born. Little did I know that her story would become what it is to us today. Those were the conditions up on her summer range when we caught her up on her summer range with her surviving fawn in 2019. So it's been 7 years that we've been monitoring her as she's become reproductive, as she's been producing her own fawns.
So right now she only has 2 offspring that are still alive. They just turned 2 this year, bucks.
And while she's had to contend with various things within her world.
And I think she's lost 1 or 2 to black bears in the summertime as well.
It gives us this pretty amazing and intimate glimpse in the legacy that these animals leave, and especially when it comes to mule deer, for as faithful as these animals are to their world, to their home once their home is established, and in this instance of F-14 tells us how that's transmitted from mother to offspring over time. So if you think about one individual animal like F-14, and then if you take that and scale that up to consider a population, that animal at least needs to replace itself once. that Rebecca from last?
Yeah,
the
so she's
2021?
processing the yearling fawn.
She succeeded in raising a female fawn that could have been her replacement, but it just so happens through one road crossing during that period of time for that female fawn that she had already invested all those resources in through that summer, had made it through that whole gauntlet of survival that she faces, ultimately led to her demise on that road.
It's a clear problem with a clear solution. We can make roads safer for wildlife and for people.
You know, this particular following of F-14,
That wasn't the orange cone we're looking for. We're looking for orange cone in terms of construction. So we might be having some technical difficulties.
Back in South Dakota.
It's a clear problem with a clear solution.
This
We
about
can
30
make
more
roads
seconds and if we
safer
can't
for
resolve
wildlife and for people.
you know, this particular following of F-14,
Yeah, that's okay. So what you got is you got a great teaser to a video that we're releasing today, and I apologize about that we had some technical difficulties there. But basically, what this video does, it makes the story of transportation crossings and migration routes and ties that all in and makes it very personal to an animal story that's just trying to survive out there. And this is one less obstacle that we can provide them. And through your commitment to Kimmer yesterday, you folks are leading the way. So as you see this video out on social media or email, just ask you share it out. We're going to be sharing it with funding partners. Hopefully it resonates and speaks to them as we try to bring more resources to bear for these important projects across the state. So with that, President Roberts, again, I apologize about that technical difficulty, and I'll stand for any questions you have.
Thank you. Anybody have anything? Questions?
No, good work.
Comments, concern?
Okay. Thank
Great
you,
work,
folks,
of
so
course.
much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great work, of course. We appreciate you. Okay, at this time, I'm going to officially call for the call to the public. If there's any comments, concerns, or anything, do we have anybody on Zoom? Do we have anybody in the audience? Appreciate everybody. Appreciate all of the folks that work so hard to present this to the commission in every capacity. So at this time, do we have any anybody like to adjourn? I have a motion.
I'll move, we adjourn.
Okay, it's moved by Commissioner Jolovich and seconded by Commissioner Doobie that will adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We're officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody.